In Essos, we see that the Game of Thrones plays out in Slaver's Bay and elsewhere, presumably, just not firsthand. It's different than in Westeros, but not so much that we don't see the massive similarities. And you all are seeing these patterns here in real history, in this very well-documented era that we've been covering. It's familiar despite so many unfamiliar elements. Meaning the characters and places you're not as familiar with, but the concepts, the ambitions, the way the game is played, that stuff, yeah. You guys know this. Especially because most of you listening have Valar reread probably several times, if not at least once. And that gets you very close and familiar with Westeros, the cultures, the characters, the history. It becomes secondhand, and the more you build on it, the more you delve in, the more familiar it is. The more at ease you are going through it, understanding it, experiencing it. The same thing is happening here with this series. The more familiar you all get with this portion of Greek history, world history, the more familiar you are with the characters, the nations, the cultures, the gods, everything else. That closeness is going to keep paying off as we get further into the story, rather than maybe some of y'all in episodes 1 and 2, maybe 3, saying things like, wait, which guy was Aziz just talking about? Which dude with that Greek-sounding name was that? You're starting to get to the point, if you haven't already, where you're saying things like, oh yeah, that's exactly what Agesilaus was do. Oh, Artaxerxes never change. Or wait, Epaminondas did what now? Well, I guess I can see that. We've been learning about him. Or something along the lines of, yeah, I can see why Aziz thinks Pelopidas is like Brandon Stark. As we've been seeing, this era features great stories, and like a great story, a lot of different plot threads we've been following separately are slowly but surely coming together and connecting to one another, becoming entangled or enmeshed. I think entangled is better. This is becoming less and less of several different smaller Game of Thrones playing out near each other and all within the Eastern Mediterranean, and more of a tale about the Game of Thrones of the Eastern Mediterranean. In fact, in about 100 years, that's what the big players will be fighting over. Pretty much all of it as a whole. Not always, but the pieces that are getting fought over get larger and larger as these power structures grow and can be seized from within or without. We are slowly but surely heading there as well, and having a hell of a good time along the way. And this is all the more amazing because, as I say this, the story's becoming tighter while we're including more and more locations and places, which usually that's not how it works. Usually that makes the story harder to follow, but all these people are coming into the story and doing a lot of the same things, fighting for the same things. So it's not as complicated as it might seem in that sense. There is no tale of 3 city-states without these other players. We have to include them. We can't just focus on those 3 because they're inextricably linked to all these other things happening around them. It's not just because it's fun, it's because it's relevant. And, well, if we're trying to do full coverage, well, that's what it comes down to. Persia wants peace in Greece for the purpose of starting their own wars using Greek mercenaries. And if Persia isn't the most powerful nation in play at this point, they're definitely the richest. So the wishes of Artaxerxes II count for a lot. And he's an old man with a lot of wishes. Many things are going to come to a head, basically, in this episode, including the head of a snake, literally and metaphorically. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everybody. Part 4 of Game of Thrones at the end of ancient Greece, technically classical Greece, but I've explained that before. Ancient Greece just sounds cooler. We are here most Sundays at 3 o'clock Eastern with a live stream, and that is the case for, like I said, most Sundays, unless we're in a TV season, in which case we stream on Mondays. That'll be Hot D season in a few months. But here we are with book and historical topics, moving forward as we always do. You can catch every video on YouTube and on Spotify. You can catch the podcast version anywhere you find podcasts, and it's ad-free on Patreon. If you have questions for us, comments, things you want to say about this series, hit us up in any social media platform we're on. We're on pretty much all of them, or you can email us at westeroshistory@gmail.com. Here's a trivia question. This is from a previous episode. I think the name will come up in this episode, but maybe not. Which geometry-minded philosopher did Epaminondas and his brother Caphisius follow the teachings of? Answer at the end. Now, you might be listening to part 4 right after part 3. I don't know when you're listening to this, but in real life, part 3 and part 4 were separated by about 6 months because of Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1. So I'm going to give a little recap, which is probably useful even to those of you who just heard part 3. And as often as possible, if you're somewhat new to this, I relate the characters in this history to A Song of Ice and Fire characters as much as possible because it's a shortcut to understanding who they are. But don't take that too far. These characters are never going to be carbon copies of their Song of Ice and Fire parallels. Here's our sections for today, the different parts we'll be covering, mostly through the end of the year 374 till near the end of the year 371. We have Invasion at Last, 100 city-states, Battle Isles, not Battle Isle, Battle Isles, Helice. Then we'll go on to War Declared at the Peace Talks, and the Battle of Leuctra. It's a lot. Not a lot of different sections, but it's a lot of content. Let's get to it. But first, a quick poll. I'm just curious, y'all. This isn't some sort of deep cut. I'm just curious. Which city-state/nation have you been rooting for or you find the most entertaining? It doesn't mean you have to think they're the best or the most upright, because that would make this a lot easier, I think. Just the one you find the most entertaining. The choices are, well, as usual, YouTube only gives us 4 choices. So Athens, Sparta, Thebes, and Persia. If you find one of the others more entertaining, type it in the comments. And I'll be doing one for characters, probably next time, part 5. And if you are catching this on Spotify, the poll is there too, even though this is a live poll during the live stream. So let us know what you think. In the north, many tribal states were turning into kingdoms. And those kingdoms were coalescing into larger kingdoms. That's what happens, right? Larger, powerful kingdoms. Culturally similar to Greece, but much more militant in terms of the everyday populace and less advanced in terms of government and technology. A bit like how the North and the South differed after the Andals were established. We have Tagos Jason of Pherae effectively ruling Thessaly and possessing his own sort of golden company on the payroll. We have King Amyntas III of Macedonia, who is learning how to leverage the great and largely untouched natural resources of his kingdom to increase his own power and that of his country. King Bardyllis of Illyria, the guy who rose from coal miner, kind of like the first faceless man emerged in the mines of Illyria, kind of loosely like that. But this man had a famous face. Everybody knew who he was. And the great natural resource of his country wasn't coal, it was warriors. And also, pirates, who are kind of a subset. King Alcetus I of Molossus, the smallest of these kingdoms and the last I'm going to name for now, but from great and proud Olympian ancestry. Now, this guy made wise alliances with the biggest players. Athens, for one, and Jason of Pherae, which, when you have powerful allies, being so small isn't such a big deal. You can manage, you won't have to worry about getting picked on because you got big friends to come help you if need be. Now, of course, those big friends are going to want things from you too. So that's something to worry about. But it's better than just getting overrun and conquered. So these are players whose nations were generally not players historically. As I said, new players on the scene. And that's an interesting part about this time of history. You have kingdoms and countries becoming players because they've emerged out of that tribal state that allows them to play on this stage, for better or worse. We're not making a judgment here. It's just what happened. So it's interesting to see them go from pawn to player and to see if they can become major players or whether they just fall back to pawn status or worse, to fall back to nothing. Meanwhile, Persia and Egypt, well, Egypt had undergone a civil conflict won by Nectanebo I, which is one of the cooler named pharaohs. And Persia, well, they could have taken advantage of that conflict to re-add it to their empire. Artaxerxes sent Pharnabazus, who we've been calling Pharnabazus the Paymaster, and he was slow. He began preparations in like 380 or 379. Here we are, 374. No invasion yet. What? His pace frustrated his allied Athenian general Iphicrates, who we call Iphicrates the Innovator. So the only thing of note that Pharnabazus had done in these 6 years, besides get the army somewhat ready, was that he got Athens to recall Chabrias. Chabrias, the guy who gave that famous at ease command when Agesilaus' phalanx was bearing right down on them, calling their bluff. Now, this guy was working for Egypt, and Persia's like, hey, why do you have an Athenian general working for Egypt? Get him out of there. So that was the only thing they did, was get Chabrias to go home. And even that kind of backfired, because Chabrias went and fought against Sparta while Persia is trying to get Greece to be at peace. So Chabrias returning home only increased the confidence of Athens and allowed them to stand tall against Sparta instead of caving to some of these peace demands. Meanwhile, Sparta itself was nonplussed. They were all about the Athens is so starved for a victory that they get excited about a guy saying at ease when no soldiers were actually killed, y'all. We were invading them. We were in their territory. They didn't stop us. They just called our bluff. Is that really some sort of great victory? Come on, guys. You're getting excited about nothing. That's the Sparta attitude about this. Like, not a single soldier was killed. You guys are all proud of that? Come on. But as you may recall from last time, this was followed up by Thebes under Pelopidas and the Sacred Band actually defeating Sparta in the Battle of Tegeira, which is a small battle, small encounter, not a lot of soldiers, but it was meaningful in that this had never happened before. Sparta hadn't lost a land battle of any size. Now, they still hadn't lost a set piece battle. We're going to have a set piece battle, though, today, so maybe that will change, or maybe they will reestablish their reputation as just basically unstoppable, and this could just be a blip on the radar, something that is easily forgotten, but maybe not. And that one of the things that made Tegeira so shocking was not only was Sparta beaten, but they were beaten by a smaller army. So Thebes was building a momentum of bravery, pushing back against the myth of Spartan invincibility, and now had a test case to prove it to a certain degree, and that high morale was something they could build on, but it's nothing if you don't build on. If you don't have more victories, then again, that's just going to get forgotten and become pretty irrelevant in the long run. Athens was helping Thebes, but Persia was saying, hey guys, peace. We want all you in Greece to stop fighting. And now they preferred the Spartans to be in charge of enforcing that peace because they were the most ideologically aligned. But overall, peace was the most important thing because they wanted to hire Greek mercenaries. If Greece is fighting itself, well, we can't hire your soldiers away to come fight for us now, can we? So there was a peace. It was called the Peace of 375. It was sort of a reestablishment of the Peace of Antalcidas from 386. In this case, it was a bit of a reset. There were garrisons all over Greece, and those like Spartan garrisons in Theban territory, and in the reverse in some cases. So all of these were taken down. Everybody kind of agreed, no more garrisons. Let's kind of reset. Everybody has their own autonomy. That was part of the deal. All these city-states have their own autonomy. But it wasn't really true, was it? Sparta had to concede a lot of this because they had more garrisons, more occupied territory. So this benefited Thebes. And the fact that this was the deal showed Sparta's loss of power. They lost some authority. But they were still in charge of the peace. Persia still put them in charge of this. And so the Thebans maybe benefited a lot by the loss of Spartan garrisons, but still Sparta had the upper hand overall. Athens loved this They may have benefited the most from this because the peace treaty said, hey, no more leagues, no more alliances like that with it on land. But they didn't forbid naval alliances. And if Athens is like, well, that's the top thing we do. So they made a statue of peace, a peace statue of marble. And this is the first time they've ever done that, personifying peace as a being. But the personification was wealth. Like, yeah, peace. That means money. Because allowing Athens' navy to just go everywhere and trade and start dominating the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean again was, well, they knew what was going to happen. Athens, they're like, money. The statue wasn't even finished before the peace was broken, y'all, to the surprise of nobody. So again, Artaxerxes wanted all of Greece to be at peace so he could hire their soldiers and be like, hey, I want to use your soldiers in Egypt. But money. Of course, money can be used a lot of ways, right? It's not just about bribery. Persians were experts at all these different ways of using money because they had so much of it and had a little experience. And one of the ways they can do this is, you don't want my money? You're not willing to take my money? You're not scared of my troops because they're 1,500 miles away? Okay, fair point. Well, what if I give money to your next door neighbor who hates you? Lots of money. I also give them armor and swords and things that you would buy with money to start wars. Maybe I'll give them mercenaries. Maybe they have enough money with the money I give them to hire their own mercenaries. That is not a problem you want to have happen. That's a use of Persian money that, well, it's better if you accept their bribe than take that as a secondary result, right? Right? This is the implied threat of their unlimited wealth, basically, at all times. But also, this is the ancient world, and things can move slowly, given the vast differences in scale and time and the sheer logistical challenges of communication and in quality of information. But sometimes things move surprisingly quickly because, again, this area of Greece is small. Again, it's like one day to get from Sparta to Athens. Now, here's a quick footnote before we get into the meat of the story. With grain, meat of the story, get it? Athens changed their grain taxes around this time in 374. And you might be going, well, who cares? Well, John said the same thing to Sam when Sam was going off about, hey, these books tell us what the Night's Watch ate 500 years ago. And John's like, why the hell do I care about that? Well, it's very useful and enlightening, in fact, and Sam explained why. Here, I will explain why it's useful in this case. Because the grain tax was on their allies, Athens' allies. In this case, Skyros, Lemnos, and Imbros. They own grain and barley, and they have to give it to Athens at very specific times, according to this deal. That grain is then sold in Athens. They even denote exactly where the grain is going to be stored. That grain is then sold, and the profits to Athenians, and the profits fund military actions. The law is very specific about this, the percentages, who owes how much grain, how much barley, things like that. The reason we know this is almost as interesting as the contents. The terms were carved on a marble stela. Okay, that's how a lot of these things were done. They wanted to give it a sense of permanence, like a gravestone or something like that. It's a lot more permanent, even though, like we said, this didn't last. Like a lot of things, I mean, this is just a tax. I don't know actually when it ended. But anyway, at some point in history, we have no idea when, the marble stela was taken down. It was no longer valid, that grain tax, so it was probably just whatever. In 1986, someone found it, almost exactly 40 years ago. It was found as part of a repair project. Basically, someone had taken it out of the ground and used it to patch up a section of wall near the Great Athenian Drain, this giant drain they have. This is a 1.1 meter tall piece of marble. So even though it's used in this drain where there's just been like maybe hundreds of years of water flowing past it, you can read every single bit of the text on this thing. Now, recall, they don't use dates. It doesn't say the year 373 BC. What do you mean BC? Before Christ? Who's Christ? They'd be saying. What does that mean? It says in the archonship of Socratides. Archonships were a 1-year term, so it's narrowed down quite well. But the actual first word of the inscription is gods. So thanks to whichever sculptor carved that one, because he clearly dug deep with his inscriptions. If he had shallowly carved it, it probably would have been wiped out by the water damage. Anyway, I thought that was cool. King Evagorus of Cyprus and his son Penitagoras were assassinated in this year. This was a kingdom that had long staved off Persian dominance, had often allied with Egypt because Egypt was also trying to stave off Persian dominance. You know, your enemy is my friend, that kind of thing. They're also close to each other. Cyprus is an island. Egypt is just south, etc. Now, this was a very Varus-like thing that happened because the murder was perpetrated by the court eunuch named Thrasydeus. We don't know what happened to Thrasydeus, whether he got away with it or not, but King of Evagorus' second son or third son, younger son, was put on the throne, Nicocles. Historians and people of the time, contemporaries, all seem to agree that Nicocles had nothing to do with this. This was all the court eunuch Thrasydeus who just switched who was in charge and maybe benefited from the new ruler. It's kind of hard to imagine that Nicocles would allow this man to live, but I guess he wouldn't have done it if he didn't think he had a good chance of success. I don't know. We don't get a lot of details on this, but hard to not connect it to Varus, right? A court eunuch murdering the king and his heir to bring his own candidate in, like Aegon the Sixth, perhaps, young Griff, right? So Nicocles continues his father's pattern of Hellenizing Cyprus. Hellenizing basically means making it more Greek. Historians and contemporaries agree that this is also something that was very common in this era. Hellenizing was going on a lot, and it's not hard to see why people liked Greek culture. Like the northern city-states and countries, kingdoms, whatever you call them, depending on which is which, Thessaly, Illyria, Macedonia, they're all getting Hellenized. They're all becoming more and more Greek. Some of them were kind of Greek to begin with. And you can see why it spread, as I said, because democracy, art, like it's just basically freedom, right? Of course that appeals. Even though it's old democracy where it's just for men, just for landholders, that's still better. That's still an improvement from everyone is subject to one authority figure like a king. Like that's still an improvement. It's a ways away from where we're all trying to be as a society, even in modern times. But it's a step in the right direction, or maybe several steps. The Greeks constantly look at Persia and denigrate Persians as slaves to their great king. Like, all you guys are slaves. You have to bow and prostrate. You're all slaves. And that's a thing which is ironic because even Greek Democrats owned slaves for the most part. So, but if you're out here denigrating people for living under a king, then it just follows that you're going to build yourself up for and be proud of being free Democrats in this era. And more people are going to go like, yeah, I want that. I want freedom. I don't want to be a slave, using the euphemism of slave, because obviously no one literally wants to be an actual slave. So, yeah, I mean, early democracies weren't inclusive. Like I said, women didn't have much power. They did sometimes. Ownership was tricky. But, you got to start somewhere. And this is why a lot of people, even to this day, say Greece was the place democracy was born. I mean, it's pretty much true. It's certainly very different from ours, but we wouldn't be where we are now without that, I suppose. Maybe some things would have been different, but who knows? Anyway. Other reasons why Greek culture spread so much, besides this appeal, is Persia. They accidentally spread Hellenization even as they were trying to Persianize everything with their huge empire. And why? Well, we've already been over it. We just didn't speak to this aspect of it. What have I been saying for episode after episode? The Persians continuously hired Greek mercenaries to fight their battles for them. So you constantly have Greek soldiers hanging out with Persian soldiers, and the soldiers are, sometimes there's a language barrier, but they're like, they learn things like, wait, you don't have to bow before a king, before anyone? You don't bow to anyone. Wait, no, but you literally don't bow to a single person, even the people who are your leaders? Whoa. You don't actually have a king at all. Okay, I don't get that. There's no king? Sparta has 2 kings? Okay, that's weird. Wait, how small is your nation? You're that small? You guys can walk that's crazy. They're used to Persia being gigantic, right? Everything about this is different to them. You guys discuss how to spend taxes? Discuss? The king you discuss it? It's open to debate? What's a citizen? What's a public forum? Tell me about that. What does that mean? What is public? What is forum? Right? Even modern countries in current times try to keep their soldiers away from, ideas. North Korea is a great idea. What a place that's just completely cut off from the rest of the world as much as possible. They control the TV, the radio, internet. Everything is highly controlled. Propaganda is really effective when there's no other source of ideas. The only ideas you get about everything are coming from one source. It's pretty hard to have alternative considerations there, isn't it? Like, the truth. So in the longer term, this is going to lead to things like the Unsullied, the rural world equivalent of the Unsullied. That's how you keep people from getting ideas in the long term, is you train them brutally from the moment they're born to believe one set of things and to reject anything else. It's awfully effective because of how children are, and it's terrible. You do this with foreign slaves, so they don't even have a connection to the culture that they belong in. Yet they're paid like regulars, so they still have an existence to be proud of in a certain sense, even though it's bizarre and twisted. Some of you may recognize that I'm talking about the Janissaries, who were mostly Christian children taken and enslaved and turned into Janissaries. You have this white army in Muslim countries that are deadly and dangerous. But I'm getting a bit off topic here, because the Janissaries didn't come along until the 1300s. So we got 1600 years before that develops. But still, This is the outset of things like slavery. When you're losing, you get more extreme with your methods. And some of those things were already happening here because Greek ideas were starting to spread to Persians, and Persians were starting to be like, freedom, eh? Democracy, eh? And Artaxerxes was like, no, shut that down. But he still hired Greek mercenaries who would, in thousands and thousands, who would spread the ideas. So, yeah. Now, what happens when Spartan or Athenian or Theban Greek leadership styles are put alongside Persian leadership styles? What happens when Persian officers are sat next to Greek military officers? Their styles are very different. Their cultures are very different. If you thought, I can see some friction developing, you are correct. Invasion at last. After all that 6 years plus of development, Pharnabazus was finally about ready to invade Egypt with his giant Persian army. Iphicrates, the Greek general, mercenary general, wondered aloud at one point to Pharnabazus how it is that you can be so good at talking and negotiating, yet so slow with your actions. He said this out loud. Pharnabazus replied, well, that's because Pharnabazus is in control of the words of Pharnabazus. But Artaxerxes is in control of the actions of Pharnabazus. So he basically blamed the great king for his slowness. I don't know if it's true, but it very well could be. However, later events are going to show that maybe Pharnabazus was shifting blame unjustly. And as usual, these quotes are not likely to be directly genuine. Rather, they're meant to express the general difficulty between these leaders that historians have put some words into, right? They've added some dialogue where we don't actually know the exact words, but this is basically what happened. And this is an irony too, right? Iphicrates is Athenian. Democracies are known for getting bogged down, right? Too many opinions, mob rule, propaganda shifting opinion when it shouldn't. Decisions often don't come until a lot of talking happens, even in the better cases. Now, if you ask me, this is still way better than oligarchy or monarchy, but we can be honest about some of the downsides, right? But Iphicrates is also a sellsword. Armies don't act under democracies. The democracy may vote on who they fight, but not the tactics once the war begins. That's the matter of the commander. Authority structures change in that situation. But still, it's funny that the Democrat is the one saying, you guys are slow, get it going, And this is, again, men from diametrically opposed cultures working together. It just doesn't always work. We might see this in A Song of Ice and Fire if we haven't already, like Jon Snow adapting to having free folk on his side. Like, you can't talk to them the same way. You can't deal with them the same way. And his own people hate those guys. So you got to soothe over that friction. And that's a thing too. A lot of Persians just hate Greeks and vice versa. Yet here they are having to work together because their commanders say so. So you got to smooth that over. There's lots of little things from the high level to the low level that don't necessarily work unless you are ahead of the game, making sure these things don't happen. So to be fair, this was a monstrous army. Egypt is Egypt in part because it has very distinct natural borders. Now, what I mean by that is monstrous army. Yeah, it's hard to move a monstrous army. We're talking 200,000 soldiers here, 500 ships. Yeah, that's bigger than anything we've seen in A Song of Ice and Fire. So those natural borders of Egypt, they're very defensible, a lot of them, especially the ones the Persians and Greek mercenaries had to get past. So they weren't going to try a straight land invasion. They weren't just going to try crossing from modern Syria into Egypt. That's just too hard. Too many rivers to cross. Too difficult. It's ridiculously hard. Other people have tried it, have failed. Other people are going to try it again later and will fail. These guys at least didn't try that. They had a different plan. They were going to sail from north of Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean, past it to get to Egypt and drop their soldiers off on land rather than try to fight their way over the river. The Nile has 7 mouths. It's huge, right? Each has a city with fortified towers guarding that mouth. So it is also well defended. Now, he dug new channels, and he, meaning Nectanebo. And he as defense, but also the Persians were making channels to try to help land in different spots and connect their soldiers. This was insufficient, though, because 200,000 soldiers, well, it's enormous, right? And they're not all going to necessarily land in one place. So Nectanebo, the pharaoh's like, well, we're going to try to defend our shores, but we have no idea where they're going to land. They could land anywhere. It would be a lot easier if they were just trying to cross over the eastern border here. We'd know exactly where they're coming from. But no, they could land anywhere. So they just did as what they could. And something else familiar from A Song of Ice and Fire, you know how the Ironborn are often sighted before they attack because they don't sail really far out. They stick close to shore. Euron's surprise attack worked particularly well because they didn't do that. They were out to sea where no one could see them, and then they come in really quickly, so there's no advance warning. This is what happens here as well. The Greek and Persian ships stayed far out to sea so that the Egyptians couldn't spot them, so they had no idea where they were going to land. So at last, it actually happened during this brief time where Greece was in that brief peace. The statue wasn't finished. They're still like, hey, Athens is tired of helping Thebes get bigger, so they're going to back out, do their own thing. They agreed to the peace terms. Sparta and Thebes are still kind of fighting a little bit, but mostly at this point, they're just jockeying for position. There's not a lot of actual fighting. You know, they're just going to come back any minute now. But at this point, it hadn't yet. So the Egyptian invasion actually happened during that brief interim. And they attacked what was called the Mendesian Mouth. That's one of the 7 fortified mouths. This was close at first, the battle was, but the Persian number, there were just too many of them. They really concentrated a lot of guys there, and the defenders didn't have time to bring other guys in to help, because again, they were very spread thin, not knowing where the Persians were going to attack. So the defenders fled the outside and got inside the city, leaving their fortified towers. The tower was destroyed. Those who didn't escape were enslaved. Standard operating procedure. So remember that Pharnabazus earlier tried to blame Artaxerxes, and I said that there was an example that showed maybe it wasn't Artaxerxes' fault. Well, here we go. Iphicrates, of course, very active, very energetic, ready to make moves. He discovered on his own with his scouts and soldiers that the city of Memphis was poorly defended, and they could get there real fast. Pharnabazus said, okay, good idea, but let's wait for the rest of our huge army to land so we can bring them too. Iphicrates responded, did you hear me? I said Memphis, the most important military strategic city in Egypt. Did you also hear me when I said undefended? We do not need more men. If we wait, we might, because they will defend it. They're not going to sit here and leave that undefended for very long. Our opportunity is now. Pharnabazus said, okay, all right, well, no. So Iphicrates said, dude, all right, just give me the Greek mercenaries full command of them. I'll do it. I'll do it right now. You don't have to risk anything. Let me go take care of it. And Pharnabazus is like, what's this guy's angle? Is he trying to take this for himself? He's trying to conquer Egypt for himself. That's a pretty paranoid thought, but it's apparently the thought he had. Now, a Greek mercenary commander making himself pharaoh isn't that crazy, but it's pretty crazy. It's mostly paranoia on Pharnabazus' side, as I'm saying, or just he didn't like him and just said no because he didn't like him. Either way, it was a no. So the remainder of the Persian army slowly arrives. They begin their inward progress, but hey, what's this? Memphis is now defended? Who could have seen that coming? Oh, and they've increased the fort. They've added to the defenses. Gosh, I didn't see that coming either. And Iphicrates is like, I told you. It's so obvious. This is common sense, man. This isn't some deep strategy. This was terrible for morale. All the other Persian commanders were kind of on the side of Iphicrates, but because of their system, they're not going to voice these things. You know, they don't talk back to leadership as much in Persia as they do in Greece. So what does Pharnabazus do? He starts to shift blame. He's like, oh, well, you know, it was this guy's fault. Either way, morale's terrible. The Persians are like, they know better. They're not speaking out. But since they're not allowed to speak out, this allows the higher officers to believe that people are listening to them. They're like, yeah, well, they believe me when I say it's somebody else's fault because they didn't complain. How would you know? They're not allowed to complain. So the Persians are like, yeah, this is bad. We're not going to get more territory. This campaign has been run poorly. And guess what happens? The natural defenses of Egypt prove even mightier than the soldiery, which they should have seen coming. Egypt has been around a while, as you guys know. It's not a young country. It's older than Persia, older than Greece by a lot. Why is this region so fertile? Why is it 300 years later that this region feeds Rome? Because it's so fertile. And it's so fertile because it floods frequently, seasonally, and this happened at this time. All of a sudden, the Persian army is like, it's no longer fortifications we have to get past. It's knee-deep water, at least. You know, you can't take an army through that. Where are you going to camp? Where are you going to rest? It's a disaster. And they were expecting to eat Egyptian conquered food, but now they got to ship more food in from elsewhere. The campaign gets way more expensive. That's a lot of soldiers they're having to feed. So Nectanebo was victorious, and it looked really bad. It looked like he was going to lose. But he also did so much. He tried really hard, even though it was grim, and that turned out to give him a lot of credibility. Because the common citizen doesn't necessarily know what we're talking about now. They don't necessarily know how close it was, or how they really should have lost. It was just a bad generalship on Pharnabazus' part. But it looks like... to them, like to a lot of Egyptians, like Nectanebo did all the right things, and makes it seem like the gods favored him. He had just won a civil struggle, and this kind of proved that he was the right guy. He defeated the rival dynasty, and now he defeated Persia? Okay, we picked the right guy. We backed the right horse. So Nectanebo had, what you call basically the right to rule. Everybody was behind him at this point, about as much as he could be. Iphicrates now wasn't just clever in war and with inventions and with politics. He's just clever. He understood the nature of powerful, proud Persians like Pharnabazus, the paymaster. I don't know how well he understood alliteration, but he had a feeling he would be scapegoated because he was the one who had it right. He's like, well, this guy hates me. I'm the one who had it right. The best thing for him to do is to scapegoat me to minimize his embarrassment. He also recalled the lesson of Conon, father of Timotheus. Conon worked with Pharnabazus and as a Greek mercenary / general of Athens and was betrayed and ended up dying. Iphicrates is like, I'm not going to let that happen to me. So rather than be sacrificed for another man's failures, he snuck off into the night like Edric Storm on a single ship. And Pharnabazus found out, the next day or two and sent his own ship to Athens to complain. And the complaint was, hey, that's the guy who ruined my Egyptian campaign. It's all his fault. And now you're letting him get away with it. That's why he's running away, because he doesn't want to take responsibility for what he did. Give him back. Athens treated this a lot like Sparta treated the affairs of Phoibidas and Sphodrias. They were like, oh, yeah, we'll punish him. Definitely. We'll hold a trial. And we'll do whatever we need to do. And you're probably right. He's guilty, right? We'll almost certainly punish him. They didn't punish him. We'll do our own internal investigation. Their internal investigation revealed what I've been saying, that Iphicrates didn't do anything wrong. Now, this is the opposite, of course, of Phoibidas and Sphodrias in that case, because Phoibidas and Sphodrias were actually guilty, whereas Iphicrates was not. So they were very diplomatic about it. They're like, oh, hey, sorry, Persia, sorry, Pharnabazus, you don't need to deal with this. You got a lot on your plate. You got that whole Egypt thing going on. Why don't you let us run this trial? A few months later, Iphicrates was given command of the Athenian Navy. So that's what they thought about that. Now, Pharnabazus was in his 70s. And Greece was well familiar with him. They had been dealing with this guy for decades. They knew his methods. They knew who he was. He was a very well-known commodity, perhaps even more known than Artaxerxes, because he had a lot more direct influence, direct contact with them. But Artaxerxes felt the same. He recalled Pharnabazus. He said, bro, time for retirement. He was nice this time. No, execution, no punishments, just you're done. Now, remember, Artaxerxes was real crappy about giving his daughters away. There's those 2 different times where he gave a daughter to Tiribazus and then took it back. Well, he didn't do that to Pharnabazus. Pharnabazus married the daughter of Artaxerxes, Apamea, and that held. They actually had children, Artabazos II and Ariobarzanes. And I'm giving you those names because while Pharnabazus does have a peaceful exit from the story. His children. This is a story of dynasties, isn't it? Yes. Artaxerxes II and Ariobarzanes, they will continue in the story. They're not today. To replace him in Egypt, because, hey, this is just 1 year. Yeah, Pharnabazus failed. Yeah, the campaign stalled out in his first year, but they weren't done. They still have those soldiers over there. They're going to try again. Another year is going to happen, and they're going to try. So in this case, Artaxerxes replaced Pharnabazus with Datames. Remember Datames? We talked about him before. He's considered the most able warrior and general of Persia in this time. So a real heavy hitter's been put in place, but things are not going to go as expected. We'll come back to see how that campaign progresses in the next episode. For now, we're going to focus, I believe, most of the rest of this episode strictly on Greece, if I remember correctly. We'll see. As I've alluded to before, the concept of 100 city-states, which is where we're going now, is a lot like the 100 Kingdoms of Westeros period, with the wrinkle that those were kingdoms, these are city-states. Some of these were kingdoms. Sparta was a kingdom. And they're still at war with Thebes, as I said before. Not an all-out war, they're just, kind of like I said, just jockeying for position, nothing too big happening, nothing worth really getting into detail on. And Sparta had that truce with Athens. It's easy to see that that wouldn't last. And not just because it never lasted, although that is a good reason, too. In this case, the truce just wasn't very well designed. There was nothing in it to stop Athens or Sparta or anyone from helping other cities. They weren't allowed to make alliances with them, but that doesn't mean you can't say, hey, I'll send you some money, or hey, I'll send you some troops. That's not an official alliance. We're just sending you help. So that just wasn't addressed in the contract. Maybe they were sloppy about it because they knew, this isn't going to last anyway. But I think it's just in looking back, it's like, how would you expect this to work? On the other hand, what would ever work? It's writing. It's a deal. It's words written down at best, trying to stop people from killing each other. There's only so much that can do. No matter how many oaths you take, no matter what gods you swear to, we know how this works. Oaths are only as good as the men who hold them, or women, or whoever, but people holding them, right? And these are generally not good people making them. They're generally going to do what's best for them or their country or their family rather than adhere to some words that they spoke a year or 5 years ago. So basically, this is a ticking time bomb. Both of these cities have free reign to help whoever they want. It's only a matter of time before they both find themselves helping opposite sides in the same city. Spartans helping the oligarchs in one place while the Athenians or Thebans or both help the Democrats in that city. And then it just comes to a head. It just snowballs from there. An incident that effectively allows the warlike elements on both sides to fire up support and say, hey, see, we're fighting again. Let's fight more. Hey, they started. Whatever it takes to get people fired up. But first, we must speak again of Timotheus, son of Conon. Right? We talked about Conon being betrayed by Pharnabazus. That was a while ago. His son Timotheus is ruling the household now and doing some stuff. While Thebes and Sparta fought and Persia invaded Egypt, Timotheus was at work doing the work of Athens, or reestablishing the Second Athenian League. Another league. Yep, another league. So he's saying he's making allies. He's like, we're powerful again, we Athenians. Don't you want to be nice to us? He wasn't forcing it on them, but it was like the reading between the lines thing. He's like, hey, we're big again and we're here. What are you going to do about it? I suggest you give us things. He had also won a sea battle against Sparta right before the peace, so he was doing pretty well. He won some more allies, people that we have mentioned. He won as an ally for Athens, King Alcetus I of Molossus, the clever one that was making allies with bigger parties. Well, here he is. This is that alliance with Athens. Jason of Pherae was an ally. What a big, important ally to have. You don't want that guy as an enemy. So was Amyntas III, king of Macedon. Now, these are interesting allies because none of these are democracies. These are kings. Jason wasn't technically a king, but he was basically a dictator, a military dictator. Not a lot of difference. So Athens, the hub of democracy, has all these monarchies on their side. Better than having them as enemies, though. Now, Cabrius and Phocion, both of them are out there winning allies too. Cabrius also kind of goes like Timotheus, sails in force, a little bit of a show of awe, a little intimidating. They're not trying to attack anybody, but they are trying to say, hey, this is, maybe if you don't join us, maybe these ships come back and we're not so friendly. They don't say those things, but that's the implication. Phocion, remember Phocion? I think you guys may not remember who this guy is. He's the guy that is keen on the one-liners. The guy that's once time, when the crowd was cheering him, he looked at his friends and said, what, did I say something awful? Public acclaim to him meant bad things usually, because he thought tough decisions usually weren't popular. He was a tough decision guy. He hated the trend of constant talking and so much oration that was sweeping through Athens, so he tried to be as succinct as possible, which makes him very quotable to us. And here, this isn't so much a quote, so much as an attitude, which, again, everything about this guy I respect and like him. He's Stannis. He's Stannis without a lot of the baggage. He did not choose to sail in force when he was going to seek allies. He's like, look, that's what you do when you're trying to intimidate people. But if I'm trying to win allies, I'm going to take one ship. I'm going to show up with one ship. That's not intimidating. That means if they're likely to accept that their acceptance is genuine. This guy does it right. But he's still kind of an up-and-comer, and people would rather take the lead of a Chabrias or a Timotheus or the others, right? Phocion here is the one going against the grain, and he's still on the younger side, even though he's a subordinate of Chabrias. So the Second Athenian League was growing, and it was growing just enough to heighten the tension to when the inevitable that we discussed a minute ago, eventually something's going to break out. Well, this makes the inevitable all the more explosive because Athens is going to have so much more power on their sides when it does happen. And here we go. Here's when the battles happen. This section is called Battle Isles. You all are familiar with Battle Isle in ancient times near Old Town. It's we don't know what battles were fought there. We do know what battles were fought here. Well, for the most part. There's always gaps in the record, and there's a particularly big one here, but most of it is here, and it's really interesting. It would be ironic if another large Greece-sweeping conflict started over a small, relatively meaningless place, wouldn't it? Well, that's not what happened. It happened in an important place. Actually, it happened in two important places at the same time. Now, they're important places, though we've spoken of neither of them because the map we're working with, Eastern Mediterranean, basically focused on Greece, Northern Eastern Mediterranean, you could say. These two places just haven't come up yet, and they're on the fringes of the map of this region. And the first problem we'll describe is on the island of Zacynthos. Achaea is putting up the map. You can see where Zacynthos is. It's island far to the west of the center of the action here. These is called the Ionian Isles. The farthest south of the Ionian Isles is here is Zacynthos. Now, if you look north of Zacynthos, you'll see the island of Corcyra, which is nowadays called Corfu. A lot of you know that name. Corfu, not Corcyra then. If you have a date in Corcyra, they'll be waiting in Corfu. You can see to the west as well, all those Ionian islands, like the northernmost is Corcyra, the southernmost is Zacynthos. It actually began on the way, and I mean on the way to Timotheus, who was operating in the field. Some Athenian diplomats went to tell Timotheus, hey, there's a peace deal now, stop fighting. And on the way to accomplish this, on the way back from being told this, the war kicked off again. So while telling someone about the peace deal, the guy informed about it kicked the violence off, kind of because, well, we'll see why. It wasn't just, he wasn't flouting the peace deal. Let's explain. But it's just so wild that the war started while people were telling each other about the peace. It's bizarre. Anyway, let me get to it. Sparta and Thebes are still just kind of jockeying for position. We can ignore them for a minute continuously, or continue to ignore them for a minute. So Timotheus was collecting allies, as we said. And at this juncture, he was on the west side, near these islands, west side. Athenian envoy like, hey, deal. We signed a deal with Sparta. Stop fighting. He said, okay, I'll sail back home then. But see, while he had been out there, one of the allies that he had courted was Zacynthos. And they were having internal problems. The Democrats of Zacynthos had been driven out by the oligarchs. And of course, that made them erstwhile allies of the Athenians. Like, you Democrats have lost your power. We're here to help you. So, but he didn't immediately attack Zacynthos or anything. He just took them on and added them to his fleet. So they were fighting for him. So all of a sudden, he's like, sorry, guys, you guys still have a fight on your hands, but I can't fight Sparta anymore. I'm not supposed to, so I don't know what to do. I can't just put you back, or can I? Like, where does he leave them? Where does he take them to Athens? Like, they don't belong there. It's a strange position he's in. So he didn't really have a non-risky option here. So what he did was he just went back to Zacynthos, helped the Democrats build a fort, and then left. With that fort, the Zacynthine Democrats started to assault the oligarchs, and it was like a little mini civil war going on. Now, there's a gap in the records here. Timotheus may have actually done more than this, but it seems like he went home, and the Zacynthine oligarchs got mad because of what was happening, and they complained to Sparta, of course, and Sparta's like, this violates the peace deal that we just signed. But also, independent of all this, in Corcyra, the Democrats got the upper hand on the oligarchs and started driving them out, pushing them out. They hadn't fully been pushed out, but they were losing power and they were afraid of being kicked out entirely. So who did they appeal to? Sparta again. Now, Sparta, of course, they're not stupid. They're in charge of the peace, but they're not just going to embroil themselves in another war with such a powerful person like Athens over nothing. So they had to have something to care about here. It can't just be these two islands with people. It can't just be about, hey, these are more people on our side. These are a few more ships on our side. It has to be worthwhile. Well, I told you these places were important, and they're important to both sides. It's not just that they represent additional manpower, although that does matter. And of course, if you don't win them as an ally, maybe your enemy does. If they're not on our side, they might be against us. Zacynthos was a major source of tar. You might be like, is that important? Yeah, it's really, really important. It's an alternative to pitch on ships, which it seals the wood from leaking. It keeps it from rotting. It saves them so much money. Just thousands and thousands of pounds of silver, tons of silver. I don't know the exact amounts, but huge. Navies are so expensive. By the way, this is part of why Athens backed off on their support of Thebes a little bit. Not only did they not want to help Thebes become so powerful that they became dominant, but Athens' support of Thebes required their naval power, whereas Thebes is maintaining mostly a infantry base, which is cheaper. So Athens is spending a lot more money to be an ally. So the deal isn't great for them in that sense. On the other hand, Athens does not want Sparta to rise up as a sea power like they had under Lysander. That was a big problem. Lysander kicked their butts. Now, Lysander, to be fair, was able to do a lot of what he did with Persian money. But here comes Corcyra. This is almost a substitute because Corcyra is the center spot. It's the transition point between Italy and Greece. Huge amounts of traffic coming to and from Italy, going to Greece, or the reverse, stops off at Corcyra. It's pretty much the second most important port, builder of ships, next to Athens. So if Sparta gets this, they can almost instantly match what Athens has. Maybe not know-how, maybe not with commanders, but in terms of sheer resources and number of ships and the ability to make more. So Athens is terrified of that happening. They really, really do not want it. And Sparta really, really does. This is quite an opportunity. They're like, And this wasn't just implied. The Corcyrian oligarchs, they knew what they were talking about. They were smart. They said, if you push out these Athenian Democrats, or these Democrats that are being helped by Athens, we'll give you exactly this. We'll give you these ships. We will be your ally fully. You get our naval power. So that's an offer they could not refuse, Sparta says. So it's actually very easy with all that to understand why these two places were a new battleground. You've got a place that has a lot of ships and a place that makes all your existing ships a lot cheaper. So back when it started happening, the Spartans had already denounced Timotheus's actions, but Athens at the time were like, yeah, we're going to side with the Democrats. We're going to stay the course. This time, Sparta actually sent an army or a navy because they couldn't get Athens to back down through diplomacy. So they sent 25 ships with their Navarch of the Year, because remember, That's a yearly office, just like a lot of these other things, to help the oligarchs. Now, this man had the most on-the-nose hero of the aristocracy name I've ever heard. His name was Aristocrates. I kid you not. So, man, imagine this guy was a hero of the people. He'd have to change his name. Anyway, by the time of anything note occurred, his yearly term was over, and it seems he had been replaced. We don't even know the name of the man who replaced him because there'd be a third man that came along by the time anything important happened. So Aristocrates only joins our story to entertain us with his name, and now he's gone. So at the same time, though, they dispatched a slightly smaller fleet, which I don't know why this one was smaller, given Corcyra seemed a lot more important. Maybe they had more help. I don't get it necessarily, but they sent ships to Corcyra to help take it. Now, the goal there was the Corcyrian oligarchs agreed to meet them and sneak them into the city. So maybe that's part of why they had a smaller force, because they were trying to be clever with it. But the Democrats found out. They found out about this plan, were able to keep the gates closed. No navy was able to sneak in. And they told Athens, they're like, look, y'all, these Spartans and the Corcyrian oligarchs have a plan to sell out to Sparta. You guys don't want that happening. And they're like, yeah, we don't want that happening. So guess who is sent back out? Timotheus. They send the same guy back to come help. But he wasn't given enough soldiers. He's like, I got all these ships, but my ships are half full. I need more men. So he goes east instead of west to his allies that he just made, to Jason and Mintos. And he's like, hey, give me some dudes. I need soldiers. And this he did. But it took time. And in the meantime, Sparta attacked. The sneak attack was foiled, so they went with a regular attack. It failed, but not in a way that was a big setback. They were able to establish a siege on Corcyra. I don't know the right name. The Spartan commander, he was Mnassippus, and he took a position on a hill near the city. This hill was a very commanding position. It allowed his men to look out into the sea and see if any relief ships were approaching. It was high enough to see in all directions. They also could see what the city was doing. And what they did was anytime someone would emerge from the city to try to go to the farms to get food, because they were running low inside the city because of the siege, he would attack. So his men would attack anyone who was trying to go get food. And so the situation got worse and worse inside the city. Mnassippus was a little bit patient. He's like, yeah, I see how this is going. And he decided to let things just get worse for the Corcyrians. He's like, well, they're starving. Certain people started to flee and just run away. They ran from the city to try to get away. And what Mnassippus would do is he would capture them and enslave them. And he would tell the Corcyrians that this was happening. He's like, anyone that flees is getting enslaved. And of course, they're fleeing because they're starving. So what actually happened was so many people started fleeing that Mnassippus couldn't enslave them all. He's decided to change his tactics and started deploying men with whips, and they would be whipped back towards the city, because this would accelerate the starvation of the city, having these empty mouths back inside. But the people inside saw those that ran away as traitors, as cowards, as cravens. They're no better than slaves. Go ahead and enslave them. So they were not let back in. So Mnassippus grew cocky. He was like, oh, they're desperate. They're so bad. Things are falling apart. We're going to win any minute now. So he started to look ahead greedily. Now, what did we say before about Spartan commanders? They're a lot like, because of their system of no money, or money that doesn't spend elsewhere, they get out there in the world, they get in charge of huge amounts of money, and the dollar signs just, they can't help. They lose control. The greed, they've never dealt with this. It's like a person that's always wanted to have a drink, but we're never allowed to. And then they become an alcoholic because they just, like, kind of like that. So Mnassippus got real greedy. He's like, I got all this money. Part of the reason he had so much money is a lot of the Spartan allies, their choice is to send men or money. Most of them sent money. So he had all this money that he could use to, well, he was using it to pay mercenaries. So he started to underpay some of his mercenaries, and he let some of the other ones go. He just said, go home. I don't need you anymore. This was not smart. On one hand, he knew he had more allies coming too. The tyrant of Syracuse was sending some ships as well. He didn't send money, he sent actual ships. They hadn't arrived yet, but he knew they were coming. So maybe that was part of his angle. He was like, I can send some of these mercenaries home, save some money. I'll have some replacement troops here soon anyway, and I won't have to pay them. They're paid by their tyrant back home. And what was he going to do with that extra money? Well, if you guess he was going to keep it, you're right. That's almost certainly what he was going to do. So he just kept sending mercenaries home and underpaying the others and just kept waiting for Corcyra to capitulate while his allies were on the way. However, this delay cost him. Now, ironically, Timotheus, taking his time getting soldiers, pissed off the Athenians. They're like, bro, you were supposed to head west, attack Corcyra. Here you are going east? What the hell is that? So they summoned him back home to face charges. That's not exactly going to speed things up, is it? So they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot here. But Timotheus's allies showed up for him big time. Jason of Pherae, Alcetus I, they showed up in person and pleaded his case. They were like, nah, he's doing the right thing, y'all. King Amyntas III had the coup here, though. He really sent the message. This guy was supplying timber to Athens. Athens doesn't have a very good timber supply locally. And of course, they're making so many ships, they really need this. Amyntas sent the timber directly to the estate of Timotheus. Not to Athens directly, but to this guy's house. And the message was there. The implied threat's there. It's like, if you throw this guy in jail, where are these wood shipments going to go? They might not go to Athens at all. They might go to Sparta. They might go to somewhere else entirely. So y'all, if you don't let this man go, you could lose a lot. The cost of letting him go is going to be way cheaper than the cost of, putting him in jail or finding him guilty. So Athens was pretty pissed about this, though. They did not like being forced into a verdict, and they didn't like Timotheus, even though he was so successful. There's some Tyrion here. He's put on trial for things he didn't really do wrong. Of course, the difference is this guy won his trial where Tyrion did not. But either way, the guy went east to get allies and then came back. And of course, unfortunately, he won his court case, but he wasn't reinstated. So he was acquitted, but he had put his own money into this expedition. Presumably, he was expecting to get it back. Once he took Corcyra, he's like, well, I could pay myself back with the loot here. Which is fine. That's actually fairly normal. But he didn't get the chance to go back. So he's like, yo, I did all this stuff for my country. I made these powerful allies and you guys just kicked me to the curb. So what does he do? He does what Tyrion does. He sails east and becomes a mercenary for the king of Persia. We'll return to him later because he's not going to be in play for a bit. But damn, you screwed that one up, Athens. So they sent a different guy in charge. Ctesicles, whose name is really close to testicles. He sailed into Corcyra despite the blockade. He pulled a Davos. He snuck in at night. Manassas didn't see it coming because he was watching, well, you can't see at night. So clever move there. So he didn't realize that a new leader had arrived and morale had been greatly boosted. They were on the verge of giving up. They were starving. All of a sudden, it was presumably he brought some food with him too. So refreshed leadership there. They were not going to give up. Manassas is still thinking any minute now they're going to bail. Nope. And this whole watching the towers thing goes both ways. Manassas was able to see the problems within inside the city. Well, the city watch of Corcyra started to take notice of the fact that Manassas' army seems a little smaller. Remember, he was sending mercenaries home because he didn't think he needed them. So they're like, they think we're weak. They're getting weaker. They think they're on the attack. What happens if we attack them? What a surprise that would be, right? Manassas did not see it coming because he didn't think they had fresh troops. He thought everyone in there was starving. Wrong, because these Athenian soldiers had showed up. So they sally forth and attack. Manassas, he's a Spartan. War is his business. He's not terribly caught off guard. He gets his men together, orders his officers, get the mercenaries ready. His officers say, sir, these men haven't been paid in 2 months. Can we really count on them? To which he replied with his spear. He beat them. 2 different officers he smacked with his spear, which is what Spartan officers do when lessers buck authority. But I can only imagine what the subordinates were thinking. Yo, beating us? That's not going to make the mercenary troops more loyal. They're not Spartans. They're mercenaries. You can't use Spartan discipline on non-Spartans. They didn't grow up with this, you goof. Yet, they're still Spartans. They're still badass. They're still bred for war, even though not many of them are actual Spartans. They followed orders. The mercenaries did their job, even though they weren't happy about it. Morale was bad, but it still worked, at least at first. So they pushed back the Sally, back towards the city, and kept pushing. So they get close enough to the walls. You know what happens when they get close enough to the walls. The citizens and the other people start throwing shit. They're like, missiles, arrows, spears, cups, roof tiles, whatever. So the Spartans back off. They're like, okay, we got too close. We shouldn't have gotten this close. They're holding bravely, trying to back off. Their back off looks like a retreat, and a smaller detachment of Athenians and locals comes out of a side gate and attacks. A sortie. And the Spartans hold off that army too, but everyone inside who's watching from the walls, like you got to imagine, like a lot of the citizens are watching. Their fate depends on this. This is, they're not necessarily participating. They just want to see what happens. Like they might die or live based on the result of this. All of a sudden they're thinking, maybe we should join in. Maybe we shouldn't just watch. We're getting the upper hand. I've got a knife, I've got a spear. Why not run out there and help my fellow citizens? That's exactly what happened. The whole citizenry, or at least a lot of them, emerged from the front gates to help the soldiers. And that's just too much for the Spartans. Mnaesippus is overrun and killed, along with many of his men. Now, he had left his second in command back in their base to guard things. Not every single soldier they had was there on the field. They find out what happens. The second in command is like, we got a jet. This is bad. We just lost. So he flees with as many men as he can and whatever ships they can take. They had to flee so quickly that they did not take all the people they were planning to enslave, all those starving people that they captured. Most of those regained their freedom, although they were forever seen as cowards by their fellow citizens. But that's better than being enslaved. But let's not forget, there were still those ships on the way from Syracuse, right? Those still hadn't arrived yet. And they, of course, didn't know what had happened in the interim. They'd been at sea all this time. But however, also on the way was Iphicrates. Remember what I said? He was let go he escaped Egypt and they investigated him and put him in charge of the Navy. Well, this is when that happened. So he sailed west and put on a show of leadership that it's very much the polar opposite to what Mnaesippus just did. It makes for a great story here to show these opposites. So he had a lot of rookies on his ships because this war's been going on for a while back and lots of different wars are happening. They already sent a bunch of soldiers out. So his crews were mostly green. He's like, well, and he knows what he has to do. He's got, how am I going to prepare them for this? I can't sail into battle with these green crews. I got to get them some experience. So he organized games. Things like fastest to shore at night gets the biggest dinner. Fastest back out to sea gets a wreath. He gamified, right? That's a modern thing. He did this back then. It was very clever. And of course, their motivation to win is making them stronger and faster and more adept. They're eager to train and get better. It's genius. It's also just like kind of straightforward. Treat your men well. Give them something to work for. Don't just tell them what to do. Don't make demands. Give encouragement. Also, you got to have, you also got to have the threat behind it all. If you don't do your job, there's still that threat. It's still a military, but you lead with plus rather than minus. The minus is when you need it. The Spartans would lead with the minus, like, you're bad, you do what I say. Nah, Athenians, especially this Athenian, did it differently. He's like, no, I encourage you all. I want you to do your best. I'm with you, right? You can see why this is very, very favorable and preferable. So he got there first, in part because his men were training and working and eager on the way. And he found out what was happening. He's like, okay, so you guys have already done really well here. Good job on pushing back this Spartan Mnaesippus. But we've got more enemies coming, right? So they were sneaky. They held off and they waited. And when the Syracusan ships showed up, they basically ambushed them, caught all but one ship. And he captured their commander, Critippus, who he was going to ransom and get some cash for. But Critippus took his own life in captivity. So that didn't happen. And then now this Corcyra is on the island, like I said, of Corfu, is called now. But this isn't the only city on the island then or now. So Iphicrates' job was to finish the job. His job was to finish the job. Nice little bit of repetition there. He took all the rest of the island, the smaller cities and such, and he didn't have much trouble with it because he had these very motivated troops. Corcyrians were much more predisposed towards the Athenians than the Spartans, even though it was Corcyrian oligarchs who invited the Spartans in the first place. The run-of-the-mill Corcyrians were not on board with that. So that's very successful. Iphicrates kind of won it out. Now, remember our author, historian, soldier Xenophon, the Athenian guy who loved Sparta, who was friends with Agesilaus, who lived in Sparta on an estate they gave him? He's our source for these leadership tales. Get that straight here. Make sure you understand what I'm saying. The guy who hates his own country and loves Sparta brutally criticized Mnaesippus and praised the hell out of Iphicrates. So for once, the guy was honest, because there's a lot of times where Xenophon's histories are a little sketchy because he's just so blatant with his biases. He just leaves things out. He hates Thebes, for example. He just leaves them out of things that they did. But in this case, he was honest, and it's pretty cool. So, I mean, for example, Xenophon will just ignore the fact that Pelopidas or Epaminondas did something. He just leaves them out. Sometimes the footnotes in his book are really something. The historians are like, again, he leaves out the deeds of it's like this guy. But other times he's the only source for things. And if he's not talking about Thebes, you can kind of trust him. Anyway, it's what we have. Now, all that was for Corcyra. What about Zacynthos? Well, I don't actually have that much to say about Zacynthos. There is no detailed history of what actually happened. We believe that Athens just held on. They kept it, and Sparta had to back off, and other things happened, and we're not sure. Either way, Timotheus must have been a little bitter. He set all this up. It was his allies that supplied a lot of the troops that did the work, and then they won. And the victory and the credit went to Iphicrates. In Wikipedia, which is sometimes a good source, I can't use it too much for these things because the sources disagree so much. You might find a Wikipedia article that quotes Diodorus here and another one on a very related topic that uses Xenophon, and they completely disagree. Or they disagree a little, like one's this year and one will say it's 2 years later. And both of these historians have made obvious mistakes. But if you go to Wikipedia right now, it will say Iphicrates won the Corcyrian campaign. But I just got through telling you how many other people were involved in that. So it's a really good example of popularity going to one place or one person getting the credit for something that other people did. Now, he does get partial credit. It's not like this is a complete scam here. But this, again, Tyrion, we've compared to Timotheus here a bunch of times. What happened at the Battle of Blackwater? He did a lot. He may have been the single most important Lannister leader there. Yet Tywin got so much credit because he won the last part of the battle. He finished it. That's very much what happened with Iphicrates here. Iphicrates got an undue amount of credit because he's the one that finished it, rather than doing the more difficult work of getting it started. I don't think anyone here would argue that Iphicrates had a harder job. I think that defeating Mnaesippus with starving Corcyrians seems like a more impressive thing. But anyway, let's talk about something entirely different. Helice. On the southern side of the Corinthian Gulf, there are a whole bunch of small rivers which serve as borders for a whole mess of city-states. This is the realm of Achaia. Achaia is putting it up on the map. One of these cities was called Helice, emphasis on the word was. It fought with Agamemnon in the Trojan War. And this Achaia, this place called Achaia, eventually became the Achaean League. And Helice was often the head of the Achaean League and was sometimes called Dodecapolis, city of 12, because it ruled the 12 Achaean cities. People had been living there since 3000 BC or so. Like a lot of ancient Greek sites, some of these places have had people for just longer than even archaeology can be sure about. But they're sure it's pretty damn far back. Their patron god was Poseidon. Now, Poseidon is called the Lord of Helicon for reasons not entirely known, but the name similarity is undoubtable. Helicon, Helice. Now, not uncommon in Greece, generally speaking, but especially common not just on the coast, but around places like this, earthquakes. Lots of earthquakes. The Peloponnese, the southern portion of Greece, which this is the northern part of, is the residence of Poseidon. That's the common name for it. Poseidon is the god of the sea, as you all well know, probably, but he's also the god of earthquakes. One of his most common epithets, perhaps his most common epithet, was Earthshaker. And the connection between the two is straightforward, especially if you're a culture familiar with the connection, which they very much were, which is to say earthquakes are very often followed by floods, right? We all know that. And each magnifies the damage caused by the other. Less straightforward is Poseidon's connection to horses. He's often considered the tamer of horses. Maybe that's because of earthquakes. I don't know. The galloping of horses can feel like an earthquake, so that vibe is familiar at least. But here is a Homeric verse that I believe speaks to some of this. It's pretty cool. I begin to sing about Poseidon, the great god, mover of the earth and fruitless sea, god of the deep, who is also lord of Helicon and white Agii. God of the deep, who is also lord of Helicon and wide Agii. A twofold office the gods allotted you, O shaker of the earth, to be a tamer of horses and a savior of ships. Now, horses also are a connection to those northern Greek city-states like Thessaly and Macedonia, these horse country states, whereas like Sparta is not, Athens is only a little bit. It's not horse country. It's very straightforward in that sense. Now, the inhabitants of ancient Helica who are listening right now, which I'm sure there's lots of y'all, you're thinking, wait, where are you going with this? What's all this about earthquakes and floods in our city? What is this? What are you going? Sorry, y'all. Yeah, things are indeed about to go down, and I do mean your city. In the winter of 373, there were columns of flame described in the sky. Now, this isn't one of those, I know what you might be thinking, one of those retrospective added pieces of signs that happened, that people said happened before some great event. Like, oh yeah, there were signs for that. No, there really were. This really happened because this is a known natural phenomena. When there's tectonic activity, sometimes there are lights, kind of like northern light type things that pop off in the sky above where that tectonic activity is happening. And that's what this was. And more directly, animals left. A bunch of animals, like 5 days before what happened, all the animals went inland. Boy, that's scary, isn't it? Now, we know that's a natural phenomenon. The animals know what's happening. To the Greeks, some of them would have seen it as natural phenomena. Most would have seen it as an omen. Some would have seen it as both. Now, the Roman historian Seneca, many years later, wrote that it was a comet, but this was probably it's actually called earthquake lightning, which is a really cool name. There's actually other names for it, but earthquake lightning is the coolest name of the several names. So, yeah, so that's probably what it was. Now, you can kind of understand the ancients not understanding what was going on, not thoroughly, but why would you stay if all the animals leave? Maybe because you don't have anywhere to go. But still, if you're really superstitious and the animals leave and there's flames in the sky, that's not a good omen, right? I mean, omens are interpreted in a variety of ways, but it's really hard for me to think that was a good one. Anyway, there was also an after-the-fact reason for all this. There had been colonists from Helica that settled in Ionia. Like, these were the kind of the source of a lot of the Ionian colonists, including the Ionian Islands that we just talked about. Now, they wanted to have a copy of the Poseidon statue that was at Helica so they could have the same representation. But there's different stories about the Helicans saying no to going as far as killing the people who asked. That's probably an exaggeration, but either way, Poseidon was pissed about something because 5 days after the animals fled, there was an earthquake, and shortly after there was a tsunami. And it flooded, the entire city was flooded, even though it was 1.25 miles inland. So a hole that far inland, and it was still completely submerged. There were 10 Spartan ships there at anchor. They vanished, just gone. You got to wonder what the Spartans thought about that, given how pious they were. They were like, what did we do wrong? Whoops, sorry, Poseidon, we're sorry. What do we need to do to make it up to you? 2,000 men got together to try to recover bodies. Again, very important to recover bodies in ancient Greece. They got nothing. They found no bodies, as far as we're told. So this is very confusing from a religious point of view, right? Must have been massive calls to placate Poseidon, things like that. But this same earthquake also destroyed the temple of Apollo at Delphi, which was one of the most important temples in the entire Greek continent, or Greek Peloponnese, whatever, Greek, in all of Greece. It's a really special, rich temple. And I guess the interpretation was like, Poseidon's mad at Apollo. They're fighting each other. The actual priestess was killed by the earthquake, which is, whoa, that's a big deal too. So, of course, what does Greece do? They're like, well, we got to build a new one. So they started collecting funds. Everyone around the entire continent. I keep calling it a continent. It's not a continent. Everyone around Greece started contributing to this. It took decades to do, and we'll get back to that when it happened, because it's nowhere near now when they finished. This, in turn, triggered historical confusion akin to that which Maester Aemon deduced at the end of his life, because of a translation error. Yeah, the princess that was promised bit, right? He's like, we thought it was a prince, but it was a princess. A translation error. In this case, what happened was the city sank into what ancients call a poros. Scholars don't know what that word is. Context led them to believe it was the Gulf of Corinth, which is what you saw on the map there. Shay, I could put it back up for a second. You see this whole area that Achaia exists in is the northern shore of the Gulf of Corinth. The Gulf of Corinth almost cuts Greece in half entirely, but not quite. So they argued about what that meant, and they thought Gulf of Corinth for a long time, centuries and centuries. That's what they thought. And also, by the way, people considered it from a natural scientific POV even back then. I said that it was mostly a religious thing, but even in the ancient histories, people talked openly in our sources and elsewhere about, hey, maybe this is just some natural phenomena. Pretty cool that people thought about it that way, even in a very, very superstitious time and place. But of course, Greeks were very curious and questioning and studious, and they wanted to know. And that's great for us now that they were so. Now, a similar earthquake tsunami combo happened there in 1817. Right? So it's periodic, right? Yes, in fact. More on that in a moment. Jacques Cousteau looked for it. There was just too much evidence that it really happened. People didn't think it was a myth. Just too many ancient sources attested to it. Honestly, there were people... It didn't sink all the way out of sight at first. It's just now in modern times it sank. It wasn't visible. But at the time, like 300 years later, or a little less maybe, because 300 years later there was another earthquake. There's basically an earthquake there every 300 years. That was determined in the year 2025. A large, very large research project determined this. Historical memory would always preserve these disasters because they weren't that far apart, and they would always come again. So no wonder this place was so dedicated to Poseidon. Anyway, Roman tourists would take boat rides over the site, and they could look down into the water and still see the city. That would have been crazy, right? To be able to take a boat ride over a sunken city and just look down. You could see the walls. There was a bronze statue of Poseidon that still jutted out of the water. It was the one thing that hadn't sunk completely. Think of the ruined Roinar cities, the pole boats they were around there. It's very similar to that. And this bronze statue of Poseidon, his hand was jutting out of the water, holding a hippocamp, which is a horsefish. It's like a centaur, but instead of a horse body and the head of a man, it's the head of a horse and the body of a fish. More like a horsefish, horse maid, a mer horse. Anyway, and people, this statue was like a problem for fishermen because they could get their net stuck on it, and it was so close to the surface you had to watch out for it, basically. And of course, over time, there were future earthquakes, and the location got lost. Now, eventually people figured out that Poros didn't mean the Gulf of Corinth; it meant lagoon. So yeah, the translation error was figured out, and in 1988 was when that was finally figured out. 1988, y'all. 38 years ago, a guy named Steven Soter and Dora Katsanapopou decided that it must mean lagoon, and they were proven right in 2001. So they had the idea in 88 and proved it 13 years later. And that was the beginning of that huge research project that revealed all this stuff about the underwater sea and the frequency of the earthquakes and allowed them to find it. They did find it. They found walls, they found tiles, they found stuff, they found coins. Really incredible. Now, back in the day, one of the sources that we're using a lot here, Diodorus, he visited it. He saw it. So did Strabo, Pausanias, Ovid, Aelian, a lot of kind of famous historical names. Plato probably visited too. And Plato wrote about Atlantis 13 years later. Atlantis is just such a mess in modern times. There's so many conspiracies and kind of frankly silly stories about it. Plato lived through this, an actual city sinking in his home, near his homeland, miles away from where he lived, a walking distance from where he lived. Seriously, that is not an exaggeration. And why do people imagine Atlantis was a real place when it sank? Because it attacked Athens, all great Athens. It destroyed itself. It sank into the sea. No, it's a metaphor. Countries that get so corrupt internally that they start wars with other countries unprovoked. We don't know of any other examples of that happening in modern times, do we? No one ever starts unprovoked wars to distract from other things. Never happens in the real world. Yeah, it happened back then too, right, y'all? This is how the world works, I suppose. So Plato was inspired to write about nations that reach their end state states, when they're corrupt and their biggest enemy is themselves. But that, by extension, creates problems for their neighbors because they start to attack them. Now, he's probably talking about Persia, because Persia is the one that keeps attacking from afar. It's this so-called advanced nation that has existed for a long time and is above everybody else, is so powerful, yet it attacks glorious, mighty, upstanding, moral Athens and meets its end. Mm-hmm. And Plato had all sorts of examples. Like in the Republic, he imagines the perfect state. He imagines all sorts of cultures and writes about them as if they're real. That's what he did. These were metaphorical. These were academic studies. These were ways to these were subject matter to foster other discussions. He was a philosopher. It's crazy to think that we have all these wild ideas about Atlantis when we have this very straightforward example that happened 13 years before he wrote about it. Like, how could this not be a major influence? Like, oh yeah, I wrote about a sunken city that but it wasn't related to this at all. Come on, that's ridiculous, right? Now, the people of Helice are not like the Atlanteans. Persians are, like I said. The Carthaginians are, and the Carthaginians had a similar thing happen. They had overreached and fell back. And I'm not even talking about the Carthaginians of Roman time, because that's obviously hasn't happened yet. The Mycenaean civilization of Agamemnon and others was also in part destroyed due to earthquakes. The Isle of Crete, where their power structures lay, a lot of the old Knossos Minoan civilization ruled from prior to Agamemnon. And the Mycenaeans was particularly vulnerable to that as well. They had a whole palace culture, but all these palaces were destroyed by earthquakes, and that all literally collapsed. Minoan Santorini, the Isle of Santorini, some of y'all may have heard of that, was destroyed by a volcano. It kind of looks like it's like a crescent with some islands in the center of it. George made a version of that. What is that one called? It's right there. I forgot when this was called. What is it? Yeah, Makani, down here in the corner. Oh, that's it. See, this is Santorini. Yeah, George's inspiration from ancient Greece is all over the place, right? So that is my tale of Atlantis and the inspiration of Atlantis. And can you guys believe that's not a more well-known story? It's so blatantly connected to Plato, who created Atlantis. Yet people just don't talk about this very much. It blows my mind. Like, it's so straightforward. Anyway, one last tidbit before we take a break. An interesting footnote about dates and reckonings. Again, they didn't have dates. Remember that example about the taxation, grain tax, in the year of the archonship of Aristocratides, or Socratides it was? Yeah. So they didn't track years. They tracked important events and related them to that.
Something?
Yeah.
You said Makani? It is Marahai. I think you just misread it from
that
from this
angle. I couldn't tell.
Like,
You're right.
That is not right.
It didn't sound right.
Yeah,
You're right.
We've never heard that word. So just, it is Marahai.
Thank you for the correction. For my eyes at a bad angle here. So this event, the sinking of Helice, it wasn't the event that people used as a milestone. You'd think, 2 years before the sinking of Helice, 2 years after the blah, blah, blah. No, it was, you're used to things like 2 years after the fall of Troy or 5 years after the plague. People at the time would know which plague was referred to. Maybe later that becomes difficult to track, but at the time they knew. The sinking of Helice was often referred to as 2 years before the Battle of Leuctra, not the other way around. It's the Battle of Leuctra that was the important one, not the sinking of Helice, which, I don't know, I mean, seems like they're both really darn important. But we are indeed headed for the Battle of Leuctra as the end of this episode. I am very, very, very grateful to you all for indulging me in this series. I asked you all to speak up if you enjoyed this series, and you have. A lot of you have. As I predicted, this doesn't do our biggest download numbers. It's a niche within a niche. But those of you who do like it a lot or love it. And I've always said, Shay and I have had this attitude ever since we started podcasting, that we'd rather have one person love our content than 10 or 20 people like it. That's just how we are. And we appreciate and love the fact that you guys agree, or at least seem to, given your participation. So that said, we do require participation and help in order to continue just with our regular episodes and ones like this. Join us on Patreon to support us that way, or just tell your friends. That is a great way to help us. Just tell your friends. You are the best messenger we can ask for. No one listens to friends more than friends, right? That's the best word of mouth there is. It matters to us more than just about anything. In fact, it may be the most important thing. I get happy. It makes me feel proud when somebody tells their friend about us. I'm like, yeah, we did something right. That's great, because that's how things should work. It's community spread, community focused. You tell us what you like, and we'll keep doing it. Lots to cover, so let's move on. It's the year 372 now. Although sometimes we move to an event or place that covers more than a year, and then we have to bounce back. But here we're officially speaking to the beginning of the year 372, which was the 102nd Olympiad. It's the year 3391-2 on the Hebrew calendar, the year 4381-2 in the Assyrian calendar, or in the Tibetan calendar. It's the male iron dog year transitioning to the female iron boar year. Chinese is similar, with metal dog transitioning to metal pig. Not different from iron dog and iron boar, right? In the Olympics of the year 372, the naked sprint was won by Damon of Thurii. It's been a while, y'all, but Damon of Thurii won last time also. And remember, that's the most important event, the naked sprint, the stadia. Boys boxing was won by Thrasylochus of Corcyra. Of Corcyra! This kid who won the boxing title was under siege as a child and survived. Tough kid, you gotta think. He made it through that. Maybe he was one of those people that ran out with the others to attack with the rest of the citizens. Maybe he speared a Spartan. That'd have been really cool. Either way, I gotta imagine this is no ordinary kid living through something like that. Boys wrestling was won by Xenocles of Menelaus. There were two men of Methydria who won some event. Remember, all we have is the inscriptions, and sometimes the inscriptions are like half missing. Now, the Cenoris, which was the two-horse race, remember, the two-horse chariot, that was won by Troilus of Helice. The Tethrypon, young Tethrypon, the young four-horse race was won by Troilus of Elis again. Now, in both cases, he was also the referee. That's a quirk of ancient sports. You have things that just really don't make any sense. Yeah, this guy was competing in the same event he was judging. But that was the last time that happened. They changed the rules after that. Like, yeah, we're not going to allow you to judge and compete in the same event. Like, we really shouldn't have allowed that in the first place. But they fixed it going forward. Now, at the outset of this episode, I pointed out the clever Alcitas I of the small kingdom of Molossos and Epirus, who allied with Athens and Jason of Pherae, powerful allies. Now here in 372, the entanglements or peace enmeshment, I don't know which to call it. Like, it could fall apart and everyone could go to war with each other, or it could mean that everyone's so tightly tied together with peace deals that no one fights. Yeah, which is going to happen? Well, we'll see. Because Jason, after his alliance with them, allies with Amyntas III, his powerful neighbor to the east. So he's basically allies with everyone around him now. And then Jason allies with Athens directly. And this was partly to resolve the tension of him allying with Amyntas, because Amyntas was like, you know, he was supplying Athens with timber. Athens saw the alliance with Jason and saw that threatened. Be like, wait a minute. Is he going to keep giving us timber? Because if he doesn't, we might have a big problem. And if Jason's making him an ally, then Jason might start to, oh, you want to be our ally too? All right, that alleviates the pressure. Okay, so he's not moving against us, at least not obviously, because he's making an alliance with everyone. He didn't just make an alliance with them, though. He formally joined the Second Athenian League. This is a big deal because remember what Athenians were telling people. They're like, hey, this won't be like last time. Last time we pushed you around. We'll admit it. We pushed you around. We dominated. We told you what to do. It wasn't really an alliance. It was us telling you what to do. We promise it won't be like that this time. Now, a lot of them probably took that promise with a grain of salt. But now Jason of Pherae joins? Well, Athens can't push him around. They literally cannot. He's arguably more powerful than them. So that ironically gave credibility to the notion that Athens wasn't going to dominate its own league. Because here's somebody they just can't dominate. And Jason, like Athens, was allied with other kings who also weren't in the league, but it was still creating this really big connection of alliances. As I've been alluding to here, Jason seems to be at the center of it all. And lest Thebes be left out, don't forget, he was friends with Pelopidas, and his wife was Theban. He named his first daughter Thebe. Like so, Thebes without an S. This is a real strategy here. He used bullying, intimidation, treachery to take over in Thessaly. But once he got there, he kind of stopped doing that. He started doing things like this, putting himself in the middle of everything without violence. There's the threat of violence because he's powerful and you know that you don't want to fight him. But he wasn't actually making aggressive moves. He was just reminding of you of who he was and being like, yeah, you don't want to mess with me. But imagine how great of a friend I could be. Let's forget about all that. What happens if we fight business? Let's be friends, y'all. What's his game here? You all know Dune, I think, most of you. What was Frank Herbert writing about? Something that a lot of people missed, the message of Dune. Beware of charismatic leaders. Jason is the absolute avatar of charismatic leader. This guy is everything in one. Your best friend and your worst enemy. The biggest charmer of politicians, philosophers, and soldiers. Like he was beloved by all because he was just better at everything. Xenophon didn't phrase it that way. He didn't say he's better than everyone, but he said it kind of in an inverted way. He said, this is the one man in Greece that nobody could look down on. So this wasn't quite putting him ahead of everybody in that sense. He was maybe leaving room for some people to be maybe on equal footing with him. And let's not forget that Xenophon was always keeping his best friend Agesilaus in mind when he writes such things. So he's like, well, yeah, maybe no one can look down on him. Agesilaus is kind of implying that Agesilaus is on his level too, just without saying that. He at least could say that to Agesilaus behind closed doors. Hey, buddy, I'm keeping you up there at the top too. So again, it's threatening, but in a defensive, threatening way. He's like, hey, I'm making alliances with everybody, and I'm in the center of it all. I'm the only one who's an ally with everybody. He's kind of like rising to power by putting himself in the middle and just being better than everyone. And it's really clever. And why would you want to fight this guy? He's like, yeah, be my friend again. Like, isn't that better? Just let me do these things and we'll all benefit from it. Even Artaxerxes doesn't want to fight Jason. Even Persia's great might is a little like, I don't know if we want to go fight him. But Jason started talking about going for Artaxerxes, and that got Artaxerxes and some other Persians like, oh, can he do that? We're the ones who are always attacking West. Can he actually reverse this and Greece starts to attack Persia? Well, the logic behind this is extremely straightforward. Sure, Persia has the money, but who does he keep hiring to fight his wars? Greek soldiers! What if instead of fighting for him, they fight against him? And if Jason is leading this with his elite Golden Company style mercenary army that he's always at the head of, that everyone has to match his level of stamina and endurance and bravery, and he gives heroic funerals to soldiers who fall, like he treats them really well. I've heard the term martial cult referred to him and what he was doing there, because everything was built around the soldiery and just revering that aspect of society. So he's moving up the ladder of authority without fighting any battles. He's being in charge of more and more people are looking up to him without him actually killing or, winning elections or just his influence was just so all encompassing in so many ways, in so many places, in so many facets of society. He couldn't help but just continue to rise. And this talk about attacking Persia, oh boy, did that go well with Greeks about as, in the opposite way that it went poorly for how Persians received it. Because they're like, yeah, we hate them. They're always pushing us around. They're always telling us what to do. They're corrupt. They're slow and lazy. They got too much money. They aren't men. They wear makeup. This is actual things they would complain about. They always bow. They have to kneel to their king. How pathetic. Well, those aren't men. Right? This is the way they thought. So Jason's sort of capturing that spirit and directing it towards who the real enemy is. Like, why are we fighting each other? Why do Greeks keep fighting each other? Isn't Artaxerxes part of the reason why that keeps happening? Isn't he encouraging that? Even when he's telling us to be at peace so he can bring us to fight in Egypt, he's still manipulating us, y'all. That's what's happening. A lot of people are thinking that. Like, he's swaying a lot of people. This starts to work. A lot of people are like, yeah. Why are we fighting each other? Not only is it wrong to fight your own countrymen to a certain degree, but those guys are barbarians with lots of money. There's a lot of appeal to attacking them and taking their stuff, to turning the tables on them, right? A lot of Greeks saw the logic, the ambition, the positives to all this, right? Persia's rich as hell. Imagine going there and winning spoils, collecting the loot, taking their gods, the money from their temples. That's going to dollar signs flashing in a lot of Greek soldiers' eyes right there. Not even greed, although some of it is greed, just profit, benefit. This is a way to make enough money to live the rest of my life on. One campaign to Persia. Now, he's not actually organizing campaigns to Persia. This hasn't started. He hasn't gone that far. It's just something he's floating. And it's being received very well. So what's next, though? Is he going to start just attacking Persia? No, of course not. He's more clever than that. It's not an all frontal war. He's doing so much by getting people on his side. Why not apply that to Persia? Why not see if some of the Persian satraps, some of those Western Persian entities, maybe they'd sign up for this too. Maybe they prefer Jason. How old is Artaxerxes? Right? What happens when he dies? I'm young and healthy, man. Am I not the future? Anybody could take over after Artaxerxes. Who's it going to be? One of his sons? Somebody that's been raised at court? Living in a harem half the time? Like, is that really who you want to be in charge next? Why not me? I train in armor. Armor I invented. I run around in armor I invented, making myself stronger, proving my physical prowess. Artaxerxes sits around with 12,000 talent, literally like $1 billion in wealth on his person. He didn't earn any of that. He didn't pay the iron price for that, right? He lives in a harem. I live in my armor out in the field. Like, just every single thing this guy does sets him above Persians and above other Greeks and above just everybody, but without the arrogance that comes with it. He just proves it over and over. So, continuing to rise, this man, very interesting. This player is looking like he might be the big one, or one of the big ones. Anyway, but let's move on because these were the maneuvers of Jason. We got a lot of other places to cover. Back to Thebes and Sparta. Back to some of the core issues here. The city of Plataea. It's a place right on the border of Boeotia and Attica. Boeotia is the region of Thebes. Attica is the region of Athens. Right now, Plataea historically had pretty much always preferred Athens to Thebes. So it was frequently at odds with Thebes. Thebes didn't like that. Now we're talking about, different times in history. This is a buildup over a long time. During the Peloponnesian War, some 40 years before, some Theban commandos tried to sneak into Plataea with the help of some insiders and seize the city. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Obviously that's the thing that Sparta did to Thebes during the King's Peace, the Cadmea, right? The difference being Sparta succeeded. At least they held it for 3 years. Their mission succeeded. This did not. The Plataeans found out. They captured the Theban commandos and executed them all the next day. So Thebes was not so happy about that. And then Thebes attacked. They were able to take the city, and they inflicted catalysis on it. Catalysis means every building is torn down. The people are usually sold into slavery or killed, and it's like the place never existed. That's catalysis, wiping it from the map. But in 386, it was restored by Sparta because it was a long-term strategy against Thebes. It was like, hey, if we put the city back and we invest in it and we put our people there and they're on our side, we've got a base of operations close by, and it's going to be a problem for them. Indeed. Now, during this current situation, during the current year we're in, Plataean farmers were unable to go farm because whenever they went to their farms, the Boeotian League would attack them. They're like, aha, we see you, we're attacking you. So they realized, we can go to our farms whenever the Boeotian League is having its meetings. Those meetings can last for weeks. They do their democracy stuff. They're talking, they're floating all the different ideas. It's like Senate is in session or the House is in session. It's like, let's go farm. So that became the pattern. They're like, all right, we go farm during your meetings. Until the Thebans noticed the pattern that the Plataeans had noticed after they noticed the Theban pattern. So they went to their next assembly under instructions to bring weapons. So they met for their assembly and then went straight to Plataea and started capturing farmers. They captured so many farmers that Plataea had no choice but to surrender. And they got catalyzed again, but not as bad this time. It was still really bad. It was without the slavery part. They still tore every building down and sent everyone to Athens. It was kind of like the free folk surrendering to Stannis. He made them all swear an oath to never set foot in Boeotia again. Yeah, what are the odds this oath was held to? Not very good, huh? Like, it's an oath at sword point. You're not going to adhere to that, right? So we'll see if they get their chance. So this was not popular, though. Like, the rest of Greece is like, these are just Greeks. They didn't really do anything that wrong to you. And Athens, who's an ally of Thebes at this point, is particularly annoyed by it because Plataea's got a good relationship with them, even though it's a Spartan enclave of sorts. Because where did all the people get sent? The ones that they didn't enslave, they were like, you got to go to Athens. Like, you putting all these people on us? Your ally? Come on. So that was not cool. It didn't break the alliance, but it was not cool. It was a setback. It was a negative. Now, don't worry, there is going to be a Plataea 3. It's going to come back yet again, but we'll talk about that when it happens. So Thespiae was next. That's another nearby to Thebes place that wasn't always on great terms with Thespiae, or with Thebes. So Thebes decided to go a little lighter this time because they saw the reaction from Athens. They're like, all right, maybe that was too heavy-handed. So all they did was say, you got to take down your walls. Everything else you can keep. Nothing, no other problems. Just keep down your walls. And they're like, you jerks. But they did it. They figured it was the lesser of two evils, so they took down their walls. Now let's move to the next year. 372 had some interesting things happen, but it's 371 where the big action happens. And this is the big climax of this episode, nicely featured near the end here. Now, remember, Sparta has two kings, Agesilaus, and Agesilaus hasn't been in the field for a while. Because if you recall, last episode, he had a blood clot in his leg that nearly killed him, and he still hadn't recovered. His leg was still a problem. And he's in his 70s now, so like maybe he's not gonna recover is kind of one of the thoughts. But he's still a king, he's still the most powerful person in Sparta, maybe the most powerful person in Greece, and his mind still works very well. This is not Pharnabazus, even though he's about the same age as Pharnabazus. Nothing slow about him, nothing incapable about him. The younger Spartan king was Cleombrotus, and he was in Phocis, the city of Phocis, which is not that far from Thebes, with 10,000 soldiers. Now, his stated goal was to protect them from Thebes. But Artaxerxes got everyone to agree to peace talks again. The prevailing wisdom here is that 10,000 soldiers hanging out near Thebes, that's not defense, that's leverage in the upcoming negotiations. Agree to our terms or else. And that's exactly where this is going. The next section is called War Declared at the Peace Talks. I hope some of you thought of Dr. Strangelove with that line. You gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room. Well, yeah, that's where we're headed. The Greeks are brought to the table by Artaxerxes, a massive power of money once again, and promises and threat, whatever worked. He used all the above were used to bring the Greeks to the negotiating table. Certain nations needed encouragement, some needed threats, some needed money, some needed promises, some needed some of the above, both of the above, all of the above, whatever. So everything was going pretty well in that sense because of this offer. Like Greece is like, yeah, I mean, kind of like what Jason's saying, like, yeah, isn't it better if we don't fight each other? Isn't it better if we go fight Persia? Persia's saying, well, hold off on that thought. Don't fight each other. I'll pay you to come fight Egypt. So Egypt is the one going, hey, why are you saying this is all good here? We're the scapegoat? So he's saying, stop fighting for less money. I'll pay you more money, plus the opportunity to win spoils. Come fight for me in Egypt. Yeah, things weren't going well. I know the first part of this campaign didn't go that well. Phicrates, let's say he was right. But I got rid of Pharnabazus. We got this new guy, Datames, here. It's going to go so much better. Come work for me. If you want to keep fighting, you can. For me. You don't have to, you get paid better, and you aren't going to lose your home if things go badly, Agesilaus is in charge of the peace talks because the Spartans are still the ones empowered to enforce the Persian peace, the peace of Antalcidas. Antalcidas was Spartan. So Agesilaus is the one in charge of the proceedings. He's sitting in the big chair or whatever, and he's still fierce and everyone's afraid of him, even though he's 71 years old and maybe no longer capable of soldiering. To look at him there, he would have seemed capable, but, it's more, looking is only half the battle, I suppose. So a lot of the other ambassadors and signees were afraid of him. Everyone knew he hated Thebes, too, so they weren't going to, maybe push him on that too much, because he's a little unreasonable about it. It's like, don't bring up that hot-button issue too much with the man that might lose his temper and do something that you can't stop, or you might regret. Some sources, Xenophon especially, say that the Athenians stood up to Agesilaus and criticized him for the Cadmea and for some other unprovoked aggression. Most historians think that Xenophon was doing his thing and just ignoring the fact that this was Epaminondas standing up to Agesilaus because he hated to give Epaminondas credit for anything. So it's one of these little historical disputes. It was probably Epaminondas, but some think it was some Athenians. Anyway, the point is what was said, and Epaminondas said, if we are to have peace, it must be on the basis of equality and justice. If we aren't all equal, then peace won't endure. Hello? Yeah, true. I mean, that's a modern thing too. We get it. It's like, yeah, you cannot have peace without justice. You cannot have peace without equality, because the people with more power will inevitably use that power in aggressive, if not violent ways. So, by the way, how cool is this? That we have actual conversations, real historical conversations between the leaders of these nations who are at war, who've been fighting each other, who have been diametrically opposed for so long. Usually when this happens on TV or even in books, it seems contrived. Like, yeah, the two leaders are talking to each other, having a conversation. Like, when does that happen? Yeah, it does happen sometimes, but a lot of times it's contrived. This really happened. We have a lot of the actual dialogue, unlike a lot of times when it's a military speech, because there's no historian there. This was a peace talk. There were non-soldiers there. This isn't a battlefield. There are people writing things down, recording it, or at least memorizing it, remembering a lot of it. So actual scenes of dialogue that aren't made up. So it goes pretty well at first. Everyone is like, yeah, we like this idea of Persian peace. This is a pretty good sales pitch. Some of us are happy to sign up to go fight in Egypt. So a bunch of the cities sign. They all agree to sign. So when Thebes' turn comes to sign, they're like, yep, all right, we're signing for Boeotia. And Agesilaus is like, what? No. That is not allowed. Only individual signings. No leagues can sign. No signing for other people. We are individuals. Autonomy. And on the surface, that's reasonable, right? They're trying to keep the dominance, the entangling alliances, that thing from piling up, right? It's become a problem. But on the surface, is a lie. Thebes is making a power play here. They are trying to get their league accepted tacitly by the signature and being saying, hey, you accept this. That means you accept our league. But Sparta has conquered their neighbors 300 years ago. This is way worse than signing for someone who has given you permission to sign for them, which is effectively what Thebes is doing. Sparta was signing for all of Laconia, which included conquered, enslaved neighbors who were Greek, the Messenians. Now, I want to get deeper into Messenia, but there's going to be better opportunities for the history of this and why they're in such a sorry state because of Sparta's, frankly, evil conquest of them. And the ways they enforce it is very evil, too. It's, when we get to it, you'll see what I mean. It's the ways they kept Messenia down is startlingly evil. Systematically enslaved, and they figured out over the course of hundreds of years the most evil ways to keep this in place. So Epaminondas had a great point. He's saying, we can't sign for... He said, okay, you got a good point. Agesilaus, everyone should sign for themselves. So that means the Messenians and all the rest of Laconia are going to sign for themselves too, right? Rather than Agesilaus just saying, nah, that's not what it means. He flips out. He jumps out of his chair, which means his leg is maybe a little okay, right? And basically repeats himself. He's like, will you allow the Boeotian cities to sign for themselves? And Epaminondas is like, will you allow the Laconian cities to sign for themselves? He just repeats himself too. And Agesilaus blows a gasket. Even though he's on the side of extreme hypocrisy and everyone can kind of see it, Epaminondas just trapped him rhetorically and everyone knows it. And that's probably why he got so mad, because he just lost a battle of words to a man at this point he's never heard of. Most people don't know who Epaminondas is at this point. I've talked about him a lot because I know where this story is going and because he's one of my favorites. But we talked about him ahead of time because of moments like this and because of future moments where he is just the star or a star and is doing amazing things that make him a great character and a reason to spend a lot of time talking about him. He just owns Agesilaus verbally here, and it shows. Agesilaus, brave on the battlefield, cannot keep his cool here. He's never been spoken to like this. It's maybe that's a bit telling that the system he lives under, not enough pushback, not enough criticism. This is a guy that isn't told no often enough. He's told no publicly and he's just furious. His pride. Remember, this is a Tywin clone, right? We've compared him to Tywin in a lot of ways. Not in all ways, but this is one that pretty Tywin-like here. He's pissed. Even when he's being challenged on something that he's being a blatant hypocrite for. So what happens? Agesilaus, earlier I said, well, they don't want him to lose his temper. Well, he lost his temper. He said, screw you, Thebes. I'm in charge. I rule these proceedings. You're out. He uses the word expondo. It sounds like something a magician would say, right? Expondo. You're out. That's what it means. You are not included in the term. You are not in the peace deal. Everyone in Greece is included but you. Now, take a step back here. Agesilaus is clever. Probably he did just lose his temper and was actually mad. But this might have been performative. Because the end result here is that everyone else is bound to the treaty. They signed it before this disagreement happened. They had already written their name down. They signed. The pieces, they're beholden to it, right? All of a sudden, Thebes is left out. Thebes now can't have local allies. They've all signed to not do that. Sparta still has their conquered territory and has all this. So they have more power. So now it's just Sparta versus Thebes. No allies on either side other than the one Sparta hypocritically still has that Epaminondas called them out on. They can't. So the other allies, their hands are tied. We just signed. I'm sorry, we can't help. So Epaminondas might have screwed his fellow countrymen here. According to what we know, they were on board with his speech. They were fine with him pushing back like that. Consequences be damned. But the consequences appeared to be severe. They had to run home. They had to rush back to Thebes and get the army ready. Because, They already knew Cleombrotus' 10,000 men were close by in focus. That leverage bit, well, they used that leverage. It didn't actually get them any leverage, but the threat remained. So, as cool as it is to see someone stand up to Agesilaus like that, a lot of people were like, yeah, go, my man. He needs to talk to him like that. Yeah, tell him what's right. The rest of the Greece might have, at the same time, saw it as folly. Like, tough talk, but Epaminondas had never led soldiers before. He had fought in battles, absolutely, but he'd never been a general before. So, like, yeah, tough talk, but did you guys just get yourselves all killed? Sparta's still the dominant land power, and you got to face them on your own? Are you sure you wanted this? Like, great talking, y'all, but you might all just get killed here. So a lot of people saw that coming. They're like, oh boy, Thebes is screwed. They just talked themselves out of existence. They just pissed off the most powerful man in Greece, the one guy you shouldn't piss off. They already had soldiers ready. At the same time, there was a lot of buzz about his ideas. Whether or not Epaminondas lives another week or two, he made some good points. And those points started to spread. People talked about his work. They're like, you know what? He pointed out the hypocrisy of the Spartan system. You'd think it's obvious, but it's not, because it had been in place for so long. You know, these ideas aren't as necessarily as straightforward to us as they would have been back then, because, well, they're in the middle of it. They're living it. You know, things aren't always obvious when you're in the middle of something. When you're on, sometimes it takes an outsider or a different sort of thinker like Epaminondas to point out the obvious. And then it takes a little while for people to kind of let that settle in and kind of go, you know what, he's right. So it might have been a bigger deal than we think in terms of getting a lot of people's attention and causing them to start thinking differently. Whether or not it actually got them to take the battlefield or pick up their spear is a different matter, but just the pervasive nature of freedom, right? And Greece is getting more and more free. The Spartan system has always kind of not fit that well with these ideas of emerging democracy and freedom and pushing back against Persia. Like, that has never really meshed very well. So now it was like a leap forward of this. So, despite all that, though, yeah, people weren't very optimistic about what was going to happen next to Thebes. So Agesilaus rushed home also, met with the ephors and Gerousia, you know, the other people in charge down at Sparta, the 5 ephors and, was it 27 Gerousia? Some other guy stood up and was like, let's follow the peace terms. The peace terms require us to summon allies to go attack Thebes. We were like, well, because they've broke the peace deal, Thebes did, according to Sparta. So if anyone breaks the peace deal, then the allies are required to help go fight whoever broke the peace deal. So it isn't just Thebes against Sparta, it's Thebes against Sparta and whoever Sparta brings to the table. However, Sparta doesn't want to bring anyone to the table, despite what this guy is saying. And he also points out that this is a holy oath. This is a matter of piety. We should do the terms that we agreed to. So Agesilaus responds with a speech encouraging everyone to call that guy ridiculous. And it worked. They laughed at him. Even though he was following the rules they had set out. Agesilaus was like, this guy, rules. We make the rules. We're Sparta. We're in charge. We do what we want. That's the real law here. And they're like, yeah, Sparta number 1. Yeah, let's go. So word was sent. A fast rider sent out. Cleombrotus, march on Thebes. Give them one last chance to dissolve their league. If they don't agree, that's it. Attack. Thebes said, no, we are maintaining our nope. We will not bow down to this pressure. So they started blocking mountain passes to be like, all right, we're going to guard our mountain passes. We can use fewer men can stop a lot more. But Cleombrotus saw that coming. He went through a difficult mountain pass, one that was not expected to be used. He didn't have too much trouble with it. Spartans being tough and well prepared and all that, even though a lot of his army wasn't fully Spartan. Again, it's full of allies. They made it through. So in only 3 weeks after the peace talks, Cleombrotus was on the plain of Leuctra, which is very near Thebes, with 10,000 plus soldiers. It was the summer of 371. The Battle of Leuctra. So, with limited time, the Spartans were camped on the field of Leuctra and the Thebans were camped across from them, and they were already having to make decisions that you would expect would have been made before, like naming leaders. Epaminondas, despite his complete lack of military experience as a leader, only as a warrior, only as a man in the phalanx, was nominated general. They're like, all right, man, you got us this far. Keep it going. We're going to stick with you. He was given 7 boetarchs as his command staff. And the Sacred Band, of course, would have been included in that. Pelopidas was almost certainly one of those boetarchs. He ordered everyone of age conscripted. That was one of his first actions. And all the families were sent to Athens. In case they lost, all the women and children wouldn't be captured and sent into slavery. Well, maybe they would be, because maybe the Athenians would betray them. But better odds there than sitting in Thebes, hoping that Sparta doesn't win. Now, one thing that they took heart about was that this was Cleombrotus, not Agesilaus. Agesilaus is still back in Sparta making moves. Now, they had to figure he was going to march with his own army, probably, but maybe if his leg allowed him. They were definitely concerned about that. But their primary concern was the army that was already there. Now, there's an old story of Leuctra. It's a dark story. Long ago, there were 2 young girls that lived on a farm. Some Spartan soldiers were passing through, and they stopped at this farm and asked for, hey, guest right, which they were given. Because, guest right's a big deal in ancient Greece. Zeus was the protector of guest rights. So big deal. So they were given guest right, whatever the equivalent of it. And they made some rude comments about the girls. They were like, hey, your girls look really good. Catcalling type stuff. But nothing happened. They went on their way to Delphi and did their prayers. They went to the temple, did their stuff. On the way back, they came through again and they're like, hey, I don't see Dad. And they raped the 2 girls, killed them, and threw them in a well. Neighbors had seen them, so they were outed. And the father knew it was those Spartans. They were recognized. So he went to Sparta to seek justice. He went to the public square and yelled about it. He went to the kings. He went to the ephors. He went to anybody. No one listened. They ignored him. So he very publicly made this plea to the Furies. And the Furies are the beings, supernatural beings in the Greek mythology or Greek belief system, who are in charge of giving justice to those who didn't get justice. And he did it very demonstrably. He didn't just demand justice loudly, he hanged himself. He hung himself? He hung himself. And, no, hanged, that's right. Yeah. Stannis, thank you, Stannis. He hanged himself. So it was very public, very visible, very like, whoa, this guy's serious. And so it became a story. For years and years afterwards, there were oracles that would say, beware the wrath of the Leuctridae, the Leuctridae being those 2 murdered girls. And then the father, whose spirit also would be considered to haunt them. So, as they're camped on the plain, worried about what's next, looking at their army, looking at the Spartan army, going, theirs is bigger than ours. That's a problem. So they're looking for ways to help their morale. Looking for ways to get the troops to not be so afraid. Because 1, it's the Spartans. They're afraid just because it's Sparta. 2, they're afraid because they're outnumbered. Sparta's reputation for being unbeaten, despite Tigyra, it was a small battle. This is something else. People are scared. They're very scared. So you got to find ways to boost morale. Now, I don't know if Pelopidas made this up or not, but he told the other senior officers, while they're camped inside of the Spartan army, he's like, man, I just had a dream. I dreamt of the Leuctridae. I dreamt of their father. I dreamt of them weeping over our camp. And that they demanded the sacrifice of a fair-haired virgin. Now, that is not a thing that Thebans do. Human sacrifice, it's not that it never happens, but fair-haired virgin, that's not what they would do. They don't sacrifice their own people like that. It's an outrageous thing. But while Pelopidas is telling the story, Theocritus the seer is there. Remember, Theocritus is the guy that was there during the taking back of the Cadmea. He's the guy that advised the Spartan commander on how to properly seal the tomb, all this stuff. Theocritus said, a white mare runs through the camp as Pelopidas is telling the story. He's like, there's your fair-haired virgin. And Greeks are like, oh, yeah, perfect. They got no trouble sacrificing a horse. To them, that's nothing at all. So they do that, and that helps morale a little bit. Okay, cool, that's a boost. But Epaminondas himself, he's like, omens. Only one omen is best, to fight for one's country. That's a Homer quote. So men are like, yeah, all right, I can get behind that. But how many soldiers does Homer have for us here? So what Epaminondas is starting to realize, he's like painting a picture of a guy who doesn't like omens, but realizes how important they are. Because a bad one happened next. There was a banner. A messenger came with a spear and a banner on it. And the wind blew the banner and it came off. And the banner landed on a gravestone. Soldiers were killed by Agesilaus. And they were like, oh, that's really bad. A bunch of people were just like, that's it. No, battle's over. We can't do it. That's the worst omen possible. And Epaminondas just ignored it. He's like, nah. That was his way of handling it, ignoring it. Meanwhile, he contrived to create positive omens. He's like, yep, ignore the negative ones and create the positive ones. So, and again, they seemed to need it. They had about 7,500 men, 10,000 Spartans were on the other side. So he had a story put about that back home at Thebes, which, they're out in the plain. They can't see what's happening back in the city. He's like, hey, I just got word that the tomb of Hercules and Iolaus and all these other Theban heroes, the arms that were left there to decorate their tombs, they're gone. The axes and spears and swords and shields, they're gone. It must mean the heroes have risen to fight at our side. And they're like, yeah, it must. What else could it mean? And then he has another guy. He tells this other guy to spread word that Zeus came to him in a dream, commanding him to hold a festival of victory after this battle. The implication being that they're going to win. It's like, yeah, Zeus has already told you that you're going to win. He's already telling you what to do after you win. Have a festival. Yeah. A Spartan defector, a guy named Cleandridas, son of Gylippus. Gylippus was one of those Spartan commanders that was sent to do work elsewhere and ended up stealing money and got caught and was exiled. This is his son, so no wonder this guy's in exile too. He's like, yeah, back in Sparta, we have an oracle. We've been, for decades, we've been hearing that Sparta's going to lose their supremacy at Leuctra. Y'all should be confident. This is almost certainly made up. So, but something else changed, a more straightforward thing, which was that Cleombrotus hadn't brought his whole army forward yet. Some of them were still back there. And so now when the full army was encamped and everyone could really see what they were faced with, the Thebans got scared again. So all this back and forth with the morale, and it started to dip again. And they were like, look, let's call a vote. All right. Epaminondas agreed to this. He said, okay, we'll call a vote. The 7 Boeotarchs vote. I'm not one of the voters, just the 7 Boeotarchs. Yes or no, do we do this battle? 3 of them said yes. 3 of them said no. 1 of them wasn't there. He was off guarding one of those passes, right? So Epaminondas sends a messenger to that guy. He's like, hey, this is a situation, you got a tie vote. You come down here and vote. And he encourages the yes vote somehow, or maybe he knew the guy would vote yes, because the guy comes and he votes yes, and that's it. All right. 7th vote. Yes, it is. Battle goes. And to be fair, this is tricky. This is cunning. This is underhanded. But Epaminondas knows that, look, Sparta's just going to come back. They're close by. What if we leave? What are we going to do? Withstand a siege? Then when they come back next year, we'll be weaker because we were holed up all year inside, and a bunch of us died of malnutrition. It's now or never, y'all. That was his attitude, but he didn't present it that way because that's not a good way to build morale. Telling people that we have no choice but to fight now is not the most optimistic. So he does these omens, these fake omens. Again, this is his first time being a general, y'all. Like, this is advanced morale maneuvering, very advanced stuff, very clever stuff that you would expect an old wily veteran general to do, a veteran of 100 battles type guy to do this. But this is his first. It's crazy. This guy's a philosopher, right? Him and his brother were students of Lysis, who was a student of Pythagoras, and this is a philosopher, warrior, general in action, y'all. It's really something. But was it enough? Was it enough? They're still outnumbered, and it's still Sparta, right? So let's get to the dispositions. We're getting very close to the actual battle. Archidamus, son of Agesilaus, his heir. He commanded the other wing, which is a fairly standard Spartan phalanx arrangement. Of course, the first wing controlled by Cleombrotus himself. They had 9,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry. But don't get the wrong impression. When you're thinking Game of Thrones, you're thinking the cavalry is the best. right? Whether it's Dothraki, whether it's Westerosi knights, they're generally the best, unless it's Unsullied, of course. Now, it isn't the case that the Spartans should be thought of like Unsullied, although that's not too far off. But it's more that the cavalry sucks rather than the infantry is so much better. It is better, but it's not that they're better than some great cavalry. It's that the cavalry actually sucks. And I don't mean they're just low quality. I mean, literally, the Spartans give their worst troops the horses. They're that infantry obsessed that it's almost like they're not even assigned. It's like, okay, who are our current worst 1,000 guys? You're the horsemen. That's weird, right? So Epaminondas, however, he is doing all sorts of different things. The Spartans are very conservative. And most of ancient Greece is too. They do their set piece battles. They line their phalanxes up. Remember what I told you many times before? Best guys on the right. Your right fights their left. Their left fights your right. Their worst fights your best. Our best fights their worst. And then you meet in the middle. Epaminondas said, nope. I'm not just an innovator of morale strategy. I am going to change everything about how we do the setup. He, instead of saying your worst fights our best and our best fights your worst, he's saying our best are going right after your best. Kind of like what Pelopidas did it to Gyra. He's like, our best are going to fight your best. And if our best win, your best are going to be leaderless and confused and not know what to do. And Epaminondas demonstrated this with a visual metaphor. He got in front of the entire army, held a live snake up, and crushed its head in his hand and said, the Spartan army is this body. If you kill the head, all of it. But he's taking the metaphor further than that. Pelopidas killed the Spartan officers and the rest of the army fell apart. This is a much bigger army. Epaminondas' idea isn't just to kill the Spartan officers, although that is his plan. He wants to kill as many of the actual Spartans as possible so that the allies not just don't want to fight, but they realize they don't have to. They're not there because they want to be. They're not there because they're ideologically behind Sparta. They're there because they got no choice. It's that or else. And they sign that deal. But what happens if Sparta loses a lot of men right in front of them? Then they can go, wait a minute. How are they going to make us fight for them anymore? They just lost like a bunch of dudes, a bunch of soldiers. We could break free. That's exactly what Epaminondas is aiming for. He wants them to perceive that. He wants them to see that they don't have to fight for Sparta. And so his strategy goes even further. Not only does he put his weakest on one side to face their weakest, he tells his weakest to line up in echelon formation. If you don't know what echelon formation, it's like this. It's like a backward diagonal line. So each man going farther out to the right is slightly farther behind than the rest. And this is by design because he does not want the left wings to meet at all. He doesn't want any bad blood between the allies of Sparta that he's trying to detach from them. He's like, kill the head of the snake. They won't fight us. They don't hate us unless we make them. So he doesn't just tell his left wing weaker soldiers to hold back. He tells them to back up. He's like, do not fight them. Give us time. You back up. Buy time. We're going to move forward at double speed, finish off those Spartans if we can, and then you guys won't have to do anything. Now, he doesn't actually tell them all this, the full plan, because then the plan would get out. But that's the idea. And now a standard phalanx is 12 deep. Epaminondas said, you know what? Let's go 50. And remember, this isn't just like a line of soldiers. They're all pushing each other. The one guy in the back has his shield planted into the back of the guy in front of him, and he's pushing. He's pushing. So 12 guys pushing against each other in a standard phalanx arrangement. Spartans would always win this because they spend all day practicing pushing. It's like an NFL scrum or rugby scrum where they're just shoving and shoving. They do this all day long every day because they don't farm. They don't write. They don't do anything but learn how to fight. So they're really good at it. But 12 against 50? They're not that good, right? Now, so Epaminondas has quite a plan. It's quite a plan. And Cleombrotus doesn't know any of this. He doesn't have an inkling of any of that. So right as they're lining up to do battle, they're getting their dispositions in their echelon formation for the allies, the ones that Epaminondas isn't even counting on that much. The Thespians are like, you know what? We're pissed about that whole walls thing. We're leaving. We're not fighting. We're not going to fight Sparta for you wall taking down jerks. And Epaminondas is like, okay, that's cool. we're not here to force you to fight battles that you don't believe in. Hint, hint, Spartan allies. In fact, remember the Mantineans? We talked about the Mantineans. They're the ones whose walls came down thanks to a diverted river, like the rains of Castamere. Well, they were fighting for Sparta that day. They saw the they saw the Thespians get to leave. Maybe they didn't know exactly because it was about the walls, but I bet they did. They heard about that. News gets around. It's a small country. And they're like, their walls were taken down and he's letting them go. We got our walls taken down by Sparta and we're standing here fighting for them. How good could their morale possibly be? Yet they didn't leave. They were still afraid of the pushback from Sparta. They were still expecting to be on the winning side. The trumpets blew. The horns started the battle. Here it comes. Now, there may have been trickery in preparation. Well, there was trickery in preparations and dispositions, but no side was caught off guard at the start of the battle. It was like a set piece battle. We start now. Now, Cleombrotus had taken heat for this, actually. He should have attacked sooner, probably. He had shown passivity in general towards Thebes. In most of his life, he had shown a preference for being at war with Athens over Thebes. But generally, he lost out on that because Agesilaus held more power, more sway, was much older, much more entrenched. And Cleombrotus was warned, hey, bro, if you persist and you don't attack Thebes, you might get exiled. Your grandfather got exiled for that exact thing. So it wasn't an idle threat. Remember King Pausanias? We talked about that guy. It's the guy that was exiled from Sparta and went out to write a history of Spartan law. That's what he did in exile. I was like, hey, I'm going to write about Spartan authority structures. The one I got kicked out of. Who knows it better than me? Anyway, Cleombrotus took that seriously, I suppose, and battle was joined. It went off as ordered initially. The Spartans advanced in a manner not unlike Gregor Clegane, confident, perhaps contemptuous, bigger for a certainty, not running, but not slow. They use flutes to keep time, not drums. Sounds kind of creepy, actually. I know that flutes are a big part of like Cthulhu lore, so I always think of that when I think of flutes in battle. It's not like the, you know, it's something dark and evil sounding. Maybe it isn't, but that's how I perceive it. And they're so confident and so pious that halfway to meeting the Theban lines, they stop, sacrifice to the gods, then continue. Like that's how they do it. Epaminondas, with the sacred band led by Pelopidas, advanced like some Greek red viper, especially in Pelopidas' case. This guy was eager. He wanted to fight them, not just because he was confident, maybe a little bloodthirsty like the red viper, but also very eager for justice, very eager for violently achieved justice, with spears too, like the red viper, right? But without the poison. So the Thebans were on a razor's edge of internal struggle here, where their fear of Sparta was facing off with their fear of complete destruction, balanced by the great morale tricks and actual leadership of Epaminondas and Pelopidas, who were genuinely confident. You have to fight if you're going to lose everything if you don't, right? I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to. But there might be a voice in the back of your head saying, maybe not. Maybe you can get away. Maybe your city's destroyed, but you can get away. You can run. You can get your family and go live somewhere else, can't you? Yeah, maybe. The leadership of Thebes was really remarkable. They were able to predict and counteract this pervasive thought that must have been going through the heads of so many soldiers. I mean, it's Sparta. 300 years, Sparta has not lost a battle like this. That's what they're facing. What is a mashed snake head against that? So I've given you all this underdog setup for the battle, obviously focused on Thebes' dispositions because Sparta's are very standard. Thebes is very much the underdog story. You're expecting them to win? Well, I just compared them to the Red Viper, so beware. Someone who loses when they're about to win. Don't be too sure here, but let's continue. Cleombrotus positioned his cavalry in front of the phalanx. That is weird. Very odd. Because one, we just got through talking about how they're the weak part. They're the weakest aspect. And even though Cleombrotus has a larger army, he has less cavalry and his cavalry sucks. And Theban cavalry is good and more numerous. What the heck was he doing? We don't know. Historians to this day are like, what was he doing? Xenophon doesn't even comment on it, probably because he has no idea and doesn't want to delve into a subject that's kind of embarrassing for Sparta. He might have been trying to create a dust cloud to obscure something. I don't know why. And if he did, it backfired, as we'll tell you here in a minute. Usually the point of horsemen in this spot is to protect the flanks. Like, their flanks are vulnerable. Their spears and shields are facing forward. There's nothing over here. So the horsemen mobile, can swoop in and make sure nothing happens there. That's the whole point, right? So Epaminondas, his very early in his generalship career, gets one of the easiest calls he has to make. He's like, all right, well, he sent his 1,000 crappy cavalry forward. I'll send my 1,500 awesome cavalry forward to face them. He's probably like, is this a trap? What is going on here? Like, it's too easy. So yeah, Cleombrotus starts off by offering a preliminary skirmish. He's sure to lose. What is going on here? Again, good thing for Thebes that Agesilaus wasn't in charge. So that's what happens. It wasn't some trick. The Theban cavalry defeats the Spartan cavalry easily. Some of the Spartan cavalry flee backwards, and this causes problems. They flee backwards, and some of them slam into the formations, the phalanx formations, and phalanx formation cohesion is extremely important, as we've talked about. It's the whole, everyone's pushing forward. If you got a gap in your line, all of a sudden your buddy's shield isn't protecting you anymore. All of a sudden you're vulnerable. All of a sudden you're not all pushing together. Lots of things go wrong if the phalanx goes wrong, if the unit cohesion is broken. But Spartans are so good at this. They practice, again, all day, every day. Unit cohesion, follow orders, stay together, bravery, piety, always winning. But this did cause some real problems. These horses slamming into them, there's a little bit of, get back in formation. That's when the Sacred Band charges. They're like, this is what we've been waiting for. Now, at Tagira, they didn't wait for an opportunity. They just went right for the enemy leaders and hoped for the best. And at maximum speed, hoped that surprise and momentum would be enough. And of course, then it worked. Here, well, let's see what happens. The dust cloud actually helped the Thebans. That's why I said, if Cleombrotus was trying to make a dust cloud to block something, it backfired, because by creating a dust cloud, which did happen by the two cavalry legions or detachments coming together, Cleombrotus and his men did not catch the fact that they weren't facing the weak Theban left. They were facing right on right, the strong versus the strong. And they didn't see that it was a 50 rank deep phalanx instead of the standard 12. So they had no time to adjust. In fact, they had no time at all, because the Thebans charged as soon as there was a bit of disruption in the Spartan lines. And again, they did something unexpected. The Spartans like, whoa, what's going on? Okay, we're Spartans. We can handle this. Get back in charge. Be cool. But wait, these guys aren't coming straight at us. They're coming at us at an angle. They're moving like this. They're trying to get around us on our side to hit us from the side, which is really weird, because you don't usually outflank armies that are bigger than you. But they had their unusual depth of formation that would make it impossible to surround them. And they weren't aiming to surround the whole Spartan army, just the Spartan command parts, just to kill as many actual Spartans and Spartan officers. They were trying as hard as they could to kill those, and as hard as they could to not kill the Spartan allies. So indeed, the Sacred Band, with Pelopidas, Epaminondas by their side, because again, these guys lead from the front, come together. It's the Spartan elites versus the Sacred Band and the picked men of Epaminondas, the rest. Again, Cleombrotus is surrounded by Spartan elites, veterans, confident. They have Sphodrios himself is there, the one who took the Cadmea. His son, Cleonymus, the one who was so pretty, but also apparently a good fighter, the one who was beloved of Agesilaus' heir Archidamus, who is currently leading the other detachment, the other Spartan wing. Plus 300 so-called knights. Yes, they were actually called knights, who were the core, the elite knights of Sparta that were there to protect the king, fight at his side. But Pelopidas and the Sacred Band forced their way into that formation like a spear point, driving further inward, preventing cohesion from being restored to the Spartan lines. They were not able to operate as accustomed. 150 pairs of lovers wrought devastation on Spartans who would never allow such a thing in their own army. There's some metaphors here aplenty, like love wins, right? Now, at times like this, a lot of the individuals are forgotten. This is a Spartan unit versus the Sacred Band. We know what they're about, but we don't know most of their names. Phalanxes operate and die by their cohesion. The Theban lines would have been seeing people they recognized. There would have been Melon, Pamenes, perhaps Theocritus. I don't know if the seer fought in the battle. It wouldn't be weird, though. I mean, Socrates fought in phalanxes, Plato, like these guys. This is a time when everybody fought in the army. Y'all, if you're a man of age, you were in the army, or people really look down on you. Like, you're not going to help with the defense of your own country? What kind of man are you? Like, you don't deserve this. Of course, Socrates had been dead for a few decades at this point, but still. So it was continuing. The fighting was fierce. The Spartans gave good account, but the Thebans were just too ready, too determined. Their strategy was superior, and there was no adjustment by the Spartans. It was all they could do but to fight. They couldn't change their order of battle. They couldn't reform. Orders couldn't really be given in the heat like that. It's just too confusing, too chaotic. Sphodrios was killed. And I wonder if the Theban who killed him knew who he had killed. Again, it's a small world here. Sphodrios was in Thebes as the garrison commander for 3 years. Well, not all 3 years. He was sent back to face trial and all that. But still, he was a well-known person. A lot of people would have recognized him. It may have been entirely what the person was aiming for. It's like, that's Sphodrios. I'm getting him, Cleonymus fell next. The Sacred Band got him too. Father and son both went down. He was maybe more likely to be recognized because he was apparently so handsome. Surely many of the band fell too, nameless, but not forgotten. Certainly not by their lover. If their lover survived and to see their partner fall, what do you do when your partner falls in battle? Well, in this society, you still believe they're watching you. You still believe they're seeing you from the afterlife. And there's the immediate emotional reaction. You might go into a frenzy. You might have no fear for yourself if you even had any to begin with. These are the elite of the elite. They may wish to join their partner in the afterlife with some brave deed. They may fight on coldly. Who knows? Different humans react differently to seeing their beloved die. And it's not just, there's a lot else going on. A lot of people are dying, right? None of us know what it's like to be in a battlefield like this, if a battlefield at all, So Cleombrotus fell next. He took several hits and fell. Didn't die, though. And that changed the dynamic of the battle. Bodies, kings, so important. The Spartan focus became less about winning and more about recovering their king. They couldn't all know whether he was alive or not. They just know he went down. Remember, officers have been put to death for failing to recover bodies, and this was a king. And they succeeded. Some of the knights were able to pull him from the field, risking a lot, most likely. Probably took a lot of casualties in the process. Now, there's a tradition of setting up a trophy after a win. We're not unfamiliar with it here. We've talked about it before, but I haven't gotten into some of the details of it. It's generally placed as close to the precise spot on the battlefield where the winners believe the battle turned, where this was the moment at which we won. It's usually when the enemy starts running away. And that happened. The Spartans ran. They had never run before, right? It was unbelievable. Not in a battle like this. They ran back to their camp. The surviving Spartan leaders knew this as they arrived in flight to the camp. They didn't think it was lost yet. They still thought they could win. They knew that the turning point trophy wouldn't have gone up yet, and they thought they still had a chance to stop it. And to them, that would be everything. Like, if they don't have time to put up the trophy, then they didn't really win, did they? It's not a victory unless you can put up a trophy. So, hey, let's reform. Let's go back out there. Oh, our king just died. All the more reason to go out there. We got to avenge him. Yeah, he died right there. So let's do it. Let's go back. We've got enough men. We're Sparta. Let's reform. We know what they're going to do. We can handle their tricks now. We'll be prepared. We didn't really lose that many men, did we? Yeah, but Epaminondas' plan, it worked. The allies, they looked about. The Spartan allies were like, we didn't really take any casualties, but look at all the dead Spartans. Look at how the Thebans won. We didn't expect that to happen. Not only did Thebes win, but Thebes killed a lot of Spartans. You know what? Spartan leaders, we're going home. What are you going to do about it? See ya. So that was it. The Spartan leaders wanted to fight again, but Their allies deserted them. The plan worked. Epaminondas cut the head off the snake with the help of the sacred band, with the help of that morale, with the help of the Thebans. It worked. Sparta had really, truly lost. There was no denying it now. There was no sugarcoating it. It was unheard of, but it happened. The shockwave throughout Greece is going to be something. It's going to be really something, especially for Sparta and for Thebes, but not just for them, for Athens, for Persia, for all the smaller city-states. Holy crap, nothing like this had ever happened. What a turning point, what a milestone. And that's where we'll pick it up next time with the aftermath, because when I mean pick it up with the aftermath, I mean the bodies on the field aren't even cold yet. We're going to pick it up from the collecting of the dead, which in itself is an amazing story. I can't wait to tell even that part of it to y'all, because it's so cool. Yet more cleverness from Epaminondas, even in the body collecting. Like how? Yep, but we're going to tell you, and you're going to love it. Again, I said that Wikipedia isn't a great source for this stuff. It's useful for some things, but I've mostly been using Diodorus and Xenophon in this book, The Sacred Band, that talks a lot about those basically academic scholars that have put a lot of this together, helping me save some time rather than going directly to the sources. But I do directly to the sources as well, because I want to know what they say. And on that subject, a reminder about Thebes and Sparta and Athens. I've mentioned this before, but you can argue they're the most important here, but they're not. That's not the reason why they're the focus. They're the focus because they're the ones who wrote it all down. Right? We don't have Illyrian history books, Macedonian history books, not many. Cyprus history books, Persian sources, maybe we have some, but like, I'm part Iraqi, I'm not Iranian, Persian's Iranian. I don't speak Arabic. Greek sources are I got a shelf of Greek sources up here with translations. I don't have a single Persian translated into English source. It's just hard to find. Greek sources are just out there. That's what we have, y'all. The stories we have are because people wrote it down back then, and that stuff survived and is in English now. Let's be realistic here. But yeah, in terms of the story and the fun that's to come, the aftermath of Leuctra, it is really something. The game changes. Greece changes. Persia changes. But there's still a lot of other people that will react to this too, and their reactions will be to the other power play. What's Jason going to do? What's King Amyntas and Alcides going to do? What's Artaxerxes going to do, right? One thing I'll tell you, one thing I'll tease, is a lot of people are going to die next time. A lot of important characters are going to die, and of course they'll be replaced with other important characters, because that always happens, right? But some famous players are going to exit the story, and some of them are going to do so in very entertaining ways, maybe some tragic ways, but we're going to have fun with it no matter what. I'm excited for that. We'll be back in a few weeks with another one of these, and in the meantime, more Song of Ice and Fire content. If you were hoping for Persian court intrigue and drama to return, well, it absolutely will come roaring back, and it will absolutely impact that campaign to recapture Egypt. I also promise more stories of artists and sculptors, musicians, Hetairai, non-political, non-military figures, basically. Harder to sometimes find information on that, but I do try to include as much as I can. Stuff that I think is fun, interesting, entertaining, just cool trivia, things like that. We'll definitely be adding more of that. I'm enjoying adding that stuff, like the Olympic stuff, and we'll continue to do so. Trivia answer. The question was, which geometry-minded philosopher did Epaminondas and his brother Ctesias follow the teachings of? Pythagoras, the Pythagorean theorem, right? That's the geometry-minded part, yeah. If you said Lysis, I'd accept that, because Lysis was a student of Pythagoras who Epaminondas and Ctesias directly studied with. So if you said either of those, good job. As for poll results, which city-state/nation have you been rooting for, or do you call your favorite so far? Y'all, I'm disappointed. Thebes is last? The Epaminondas and Pelopidas are last? Maybe they wouldn't be after this episode, but I asked you this question before it. But you guys have Athens first, which is cool. Athens, they're very entertaining. And you have Persia next. I get it. Persia's pretty entertaining. If I said which do you think is the best, like which is the best nation, I bet this order would be different. So I get the order. I get this order. But only 15% of you said Thebes. Sparta, 22%. Overall, it's a pretty even distribution, though, with Athens pretty much winning it there, though. I get it. Go Athens. Athens is cool. They're the biggest. They get the most people. And we certainly have plenty more Athens coverage to come. That's it, y'all. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for taking this in later if you're not catching the live stream, which is most of you. We'll be back with more next time. Until then, you know what to do, my friends. Valar re Greecus.